Chapter 844. Many people immediately sensed Zheng Xiu's presence. At the start, no matter if it was Shun Xian who was waiting silently in the burned forest, or the female masters of Chun who were resting in the tent not far from Ding Ning, they all quickly followed. But soon, they all gave up. Both Zheng Xiu and Ding Ning were too fast, so fast that they surpassed common sense. Being faster than common sense meant that they had to pay more than common sense. It meant that vital energy was being consumed at an astounding rate, and the body had to endure surging vital energy that surpassed its limits. At this kind of speed, each breath would cause damage to a cultivator's body. Sensing Zheng Xiu and Ding Ning's rapid departure, Shun Xian, Ji Qingqing, and the others were silent. If they fled at this speed, before they reached the limit of their perception, their vital energy and bodies would not be able to endure. Yet, Zheng Xiu was still fleeing. So no matter how much she was forced to flee, in terms of cultivation and pure power, she still surpassed them Realm 7s. Just fleeing and chasing was more dangerous than most of the life and death battles between Realm 7 grandmasters in the world. Many lines of blood appeared on Zheng Xiu's porcelain-like skin. Just as the lines were about to seep out, she flicked a glowing lotus seed out of her fingertip into the air in front of her. Then she opened her red lips and held it in her mouth. The lotus seed dissolved in her mouth and charged into her abdomen. It quickly caused the lines of blood to disappear, and her skin became as smooth as perfect porcelain again. When the lines of blood appeared in the white porcelain again, she flicked another lotus seed out of her fingertip, and the cycle repeated. The seemingly ordinary process contained great danger and pain, but what caused Zheng Xiu's eyes to grow colder was that she could not break free of the wind behind her. Every time, the wind would be pulled far away by her, but when the true essence in her body was exhausted, when her body was close to its limit, and she needed to rely on the spirit lotus seed to recover, the wind would always be able to catch up. She knew that Ding Ning would not be slower than her. He was slow because he did not want his body to be damaged. He only needed to keep up with her and not lose track of her. But why did the total amount of true essence in his body also seem to be endless? Compared to many years ago, he had indeed changed a lot. He had become much stronger than she had imagined. When the blood veins appeared on her body for the 7th time, and then disappeared again because of a lotus seed in her mouth, she stopped. They were already far away from the snowy peaks of Yuyang County. When she stopped, there was a farmhouse and an apricot forest not far away. She passed through the apricot forest and pushed open the door to a farmhouse. There was a woman in the farmhouse. She was weaving, and there was a baby sleeping in the cradle beside her. "Heat up the soup for me." She didn't say anything else and coldly ordered the woman. The woman didn't dare to disobey her due to her natural dignity and the unique aura of a powerful cultivator. She started to make a fire in fear and heated up the millet soup in the pot. She sat down on the woman's original wooden stool. Her buttocks still had the woman's residual warmth. She just sat quietly, occasionally glancing at the baby in the cradle beside her. But for some reason, the woman, who was already panicking, became even more panicked. She didn't even notice that the wooden spoon she had been preparing to stir the millet soup had fallen into the fire. The fire had just started. The wooden spoon that had fallen into the fire was ignited and started to give off bright yellow flames. A gust of wind blew over. Some of the thatch on the roof was blown off and scattered into the vegetable fields on the other side of the house. Ding Ning's figure appeared outside the door of the farmhouse. Zheng Xiu did not close the door, so he could easily see everything inside. He furrowed his brows and walked straight into the farmhouse. Zheng Xiu looked at him motionlessly and carefully. Ding Ning also looked at her calmly. Then he sat down not far away from her and closed the door that would send cold air in. "Why do you dare to keep chasing me like this?" It wasn't until he sat down that Zheng Xiu finally spoke. She was clearly the one who wanted to flee at all costs, but she said such a thing. But Ding Ning understood her meaning. "Someone in Jiaodong Commandery told me a secret," Ding Ning said calmly. "While the spirit lotus seeds have healing abilities that even the best spirit medicines in the world cannot match, and can replenish vital energy, each time it is consumed, especially when consumed, It will destroy the recovery ability of us cultivators. Your body will grow weaker, and in the end, your body will become as weak as paper. Even if you have the spirit lotus seeds, they are useless to you. So, this is how it is, Zheng Xiu said coldly after a moment of silence. Because of this, you are not afraid that I will use the spirit lotus seeds to kill you. Only when you are about to kill someone can you see if they are hiding something, Ding Ning said coldly. I want to take something you can rely on. Zheng Xiu did not speak for a long time. The fire in the stove grew, and the millet soup started to heat up. This peasant woman was the most ordinary woman in the inn, but the old events that happened in Chongling more than a decade ago were the most sensational events in the world. So when she heard the conversation between the two, she started to realize who these two people were. Her entire body started to tremble, not because of herself, but because of the legendary coldness of that woman, because her child was next to that woman. Good revenge, perfect revenge. I had not thought that the 9-death silkworm could turn you into a completely different person. Zheng Xiu suddenly laughed. Her laughter was very cold, and her laughter was full of ridicule. Is there a true intimacy in this world? Is there such a thing as heart-to-heart? Why did you not tell me the secret of the 9-death silkworm back then? Because your mind is different from other people. Ding Ning was very calm. He looked at Zheng Xiu and answered directly. You are very ambitious. In my view, the 9-death silkworm is not a good method for cultivators and is very dangerous. I was just afraid that you would cultivate the 9-death silkworm method after learning it. But I had not thought that your ambition was greater and crazier than I imagined. Zheng Xiu said with slight disdain. So you thought I was ambitious long ago. Ding Ning said coolly. No one is perfect. What is important is tolerance and treating others with sincerity. What kind of thing is the 9-death silkworm? Zheng Xiu looked at Ding Ning, and her voice suddenly grew louder. Are you begging me to speak, or using them as an exchange? Ding Ning looked at the woman and the infant in the cradle and asked. Chapter 845. What do you think? Zheng Xiu did not answer his question and asked in return. Ding Ning raised an eyebrow and did not speak. People will always change. Zheng Xiu put her hand on the side of the cradle, her fingers tapping lightly. She said in a rare, soft voice, I want to know what kind of person you are now. Ding Ning still did not answer because he felt such a conversation was unnecessary and boring. Zheng Xiu looked at him and said, Back then, you could die for the lives of some people in Chongling. If you are such a person who will not hesitate to sacrifice yourself, can you die for this infant? Or let me live? I feel you are wrong from the very beginning. Ding Ning sneered. Looking at the other's perfect face, he could not think of any of the sweet things of the past, only disgust. There has never been a person who is absolutely selfless and can sacrifice themselves for others without any choice. Any choice is related to one's own love and hate. Back then, I chose to die in battle for 2 reasons. One is that the greatest sorrow is the death of the heart. The other is that the people of the Bazinkendo ground are close friends who have gone through life and death with me. They are my brothers, so even if I die, I want them to live. But now, there is a mother and son in the inn. While they are innocent, I did not have deep feelings for them. You say you want me to die for them. Forgive me for not being so selfless. If you want to use their lives to threaten me, then you are the culprit. I can only kill you to get revenge for them. Also, if I let someone like you go, more innocent people like them will die because of you. I think she can understand. Ding Ning's last words were directed at the peasant woman. Originally, this peasant woman had been terrified to the extreme, especially when Zheng Xiu's fingers tapped on the cradle. She trembled all over and even wanted to move, but Ding Ning's calm gaze stopped her. When she heard Ding Ning's words, this peasant woman's body still trembled slightly, but her eyes suddenly had some other meaning. She even nodded slightly towards Ding Ning. Zheng Xiu was silent for a long time, and then slowly said, Other than you, no one truly knows the secret of the 9-death silkworm. Since no one knows other than you, then who knows if you are purposefully grieving and are not certain you can be reborn after death and become stronger? Do I? Ding Ning looked at her, as if he was looking at an idiot. He mocked, I am already invincible. Why should I die once and cultivate again? If it were you, would you give up something that is within your reach and risk dying once to cultivate again? Just to make you feel more guilty? Will you feel more guilty because of this? What's the point? Ding Ning looked at Zheng Xiao, who fell silent again. Zheng Xiao was unable to answer, because it was indeed meaningless. If you're still the same person as before, then I can trust you. I can beg you, please tell me the secret of the 9-death silkworm, and I will spare this mother and son. Zheng Xiao slowly looked up at Ding Ning, because I really want to know what the 9-death silkworm is. Ding Ning looked coolly at her. Then he nodded to the peasant woman behind Zheng Xiao, picked up the infant in the cradle, and handed it to the peasant woman. The peasant woman did not speak. Her eyes filled with tears. She kowtowed to Ding Ning and then quickly pushed open the door to leave. Her footsteps grew further and further away until they completely disappeared. The farmhouse became absolutely silent. Zheng Xiao started to drink the hot soup. If there is no example, if there is no master to teach you, if no one has ever tried it before, if you have only obtained a fragmented manual, and the manual tells you that you can use this skill when you are about to die, and there is a possibility that you will be able to come back to life, will you try to cultivate? Will you try to see if it really has this effect? Ding Ning looked at her and asked. Zheng Xiao paused. Her lips that had become bright again because of the heat stopped at the rough edge of the bowl. She thought seriously and then said, "There is a possibility. There is a chance to cultivate again." Ding Ning shook his head. "So you are not like ordinary people. Even if I receive the Yu Emperor's inheritance, the 9-death silkworm, and I completely figured out the 9-death silkworm's cultivation method, there is no example. Even the Yu Emperor himself died and did not come back to life. So I do not believe the 9-death silkworm can come back to life. Why would I try it with my body?" Zheng Xiao said, "So you did not tell me about the 9-death silkworm back then, because you felt I was not like ordinary people. You were worried that I would really try it after getting this method, and you feared you would lose me?" Ding Ning looked at her and did not answer. Zheng Xiao sneered. "Since you feel I am so ambitious and crazy, why did you choose me? I told you before that no one is perfect." Ding Ning said calmly, "Even though you almost touched my bottom line in the matter of the Li family and the Shang family. When we met, you said you would change, so I thought you would change. But reality proved that you did not think so. Then I was wrong." Zheng Xiao did not speak for a long time. This kind of conversation caused her to think of many things. But in the end, just like Ding Ning, she felt that it was indeed meaningless. Her expression grew cold again. Then she said, "What is the 9-death silkworm method like? How did you come back to life after burning to ashes?" It is very simple to talk about the reason. Ding Ning did not hesitate and said directly, "This method can be like cultivating a life bond item. You can cut off a part of your energy and seal it somewhere. When the cultivator's body dies, their mind will be stored in the seal scripts of the flying sword and transferred into that life bond energy. Yuan Wu and I thought this might be the case, so we used true fire to burn away your energy. But we did not think that cutting off a part of your energy could be sealed somewhere outside your body. How can a living thing live forever?" Zheng Xiao looked at Ding Ning and said, "There are no records of this in the records of the cultivation world. Just like fresh meat, after a long time, it will naturally become rotten meat. There is no reason for this. Logically speaking, life forms cannot live for a long time after leaving their bodies. However, there are some exceptions. For example, if they are frozen in extreme cold, they can live longer," Ding Ning said coolly. "The Yu Emperor has the 9 Hell King's sword." Zheng Xiao frowned. "Why is your life bond energy on Miss Gongsuan's 9 Hell King's sword?" Ding Ning smiled emotionally. "When she fell in love with me, I already had you. She was hurt by love. When she left Chongling, she asked me if this life was too late, if there was a next life, would I be with her? So I gave her the 9 Hell King's sword." Zheng Xiao said, "So when you gave her the sword, you sealed a part of your life bond energy in the sword. I originally did not believe that the 9-death silkworm could come back to life. While I gave her the sword, I did not tell her about the 9-death silkworm. But I had not expected there to be a next life." Ding Ning said calmly. "Later, you and Yunwu used thunderous methods to destroy the Gongsun family behind my back. She thought it was my orders and misunderstood me. But she did not throw away the 9 Hell King sword. Until I died in battle in Chongling, she took the 9 Hell King sword into Chongling. A miracle occurred, and I used it to be reborn. Until she returned to Chongling. You used it to be reborn? Zheng Xiu's eyes flickered as she heard the clues. The 9 Death Silkworm's consciousness did not dissipate, and was trapped in the place where I died in battle. At the time, I did not know where I was. My perception seemed to be trapped in the dark underground, unable to escape, like I was in a cocoon, unable to break out. Until she returned to Chongling with the sword to take revenge for me, and came to the place where I died in battle. The energy sealed in the 9 Hell King sword finally awakened and merged with my consciousness. Ding Ning said coolly. My energy silently left the 9 Hell King sword, and my flesh quickly regenerated into an infant. It was just a matter of a few days by the river, without anyone noticing. But when I regained consciousness and asked about the time, Yuanwu had already ascended the throne for 4 years. Chapter 846. Zheng Xiu's eyelashes trembled slightly. Even she knew that it was a terrifying feeling to be trapped in the boundless darkness for several years. When I obtained the 9 Death Silkworm, the Yu Emperor had become a legend. There was no teacher, no example to follow. Everything was unknown. But now, I am an example. Today I have told you what I experienced. But if I tell you the cultivation method of the 9 Death Silkworm, will you choose to cultivate it? Ding Ning looked at her and asked calmly, even if there is a complete 9 Hell King sword for you, will you dare to cultivate again and die like me? Zheng Xiu was silent and did not respond. Ding Ning did not speak and just looked at her. Zheng Xiu was silent for a moment. Then she shook her head and said, no, because I will not put my life in the hands of others. So you won't feel at ease letting anyone take care of the 9 Hell King sword. You won't let anyone take care of the 9 Hell King sword, because when that time comes, the person holding the 9 Hell King sword is like holding your life. Ding Ning said disdainfully. So what if I don't tell you the 9 Death Silkworm? Not just back then, even now, it is the same. At least, I know the secret of the 9 Death Silkworm. Zheng Xiu looked coldly at Ding Ning and said, at least, I know the 9 Hell King sword is destroyed, and the 9 Death Silkworm cannot bring anyone back from the dead. Ding Ning said coldly, you can try to kill me this time. There is no true, eternal life in the world. The legendary 9 Death Silkworm is the same. The immortal medicine of the ancestral mountain is the same, and my spirit vein immortal lotus is the same. Zheng Xiu looked up and smiled self-deprecatingly. Ding Ning sneered and said, I never seek immortality. I only seek to have no regrets. Zheng Xiu shook her head. Can you really have no regrets? Ding Ning said calmly, I can be at ease. Zheng Xiu drank the soup that had turned cold again. There was a glowing lotus seed at her fingertip. She lowered her head to wipe the corner of her mouth and placed the sparkling lotus seed into her mouth. This was her last spirit lotus seed, and also the last spirit lotus seed that her body could contain and accept. Her movements were very elegant because she knew that Ding Ning would not stop her. Today, he would watch her use all her trump cards. The extremely pure spirit qi dissolved in her body at an astonishing speed, like a gentle spring water washing over the damaged parts of her meridians, and those damaged parts were quickly healed. For cultivators, this was a type of wondrous healing feeling. However, after this type of wondrous healing feeling, these meridians that seemed to have been washed by gentle spring water, the injuries that were quickly healed instead dried up like skin that lost water, even hardening and forming scabs. When she raised her head again, the spiritual energy from the last spirit lotus seed had completely disappeared from her body. The jade palace in the depths of her energy sea became even more sparkling and translucent. However, it was like the hardest gemstone and was no longer soft. An inexplicably powerful aura of death fell from the sky. This aura was so strong that even those hibernating underground creatures in this part of the world woke up and felt the threat of death. Many snakes and insects hiding underground charged out of their mud holes, trying to burn their life force. Even the cold-blooded snakes and fishes had their blood and chi flowing wildly, causing them to swim in the icy water and pass through the snow. Although it didn't take them much time, they were still completely frozen and truly dead. Even insects do not want to die, much less me. Zheng Xiao smiled coldly and proudly. She said, I want to try again to see if I can kill you. If we can fight like true cultivators, this is a satisfying revenge. Ding Ning smiled faintly. Of course, I fought my way into Chongling because I wanted to have a fair fight with you and Yuan Wu. If I am killed by you, I will have no regrets. But now, I finally have such a moment? Zheng Xiao did not speak. Countless stars flashed on the surface of her skin. It was as if countless sparkling and translucent diamonds were seeping out of her skin. At this moment, many cultivators in the world sensed it. In Guangzhou, in Chongluo City, Su Fu looked up. He saw many of the stars in the sky were bright and dazzling. Yuan Wu, in the Palace of Silence, also looked up. His face, which had always been expressionless, now showed true shock and even some fear. He guessed what was happening, but he had not expected that Zheng Xiao would not be able to escape Ding Ning's pursuit. He knew that after tonight, the world would change completely. The Qin dynasty would welcome a new world without an empress. But he was completely unprepared for such a change. He was not prepared at all. It's starting. In Jiaodong Commandery far from Guangzhou, Lin Zhujiu and Zhang Shiwu were more certain than Yuan Wu about what was happening. Zhang Shiwu looked at the bright stars and sensed another meaning in the sky. He said emotionally to Lin Zhujiu, his sword essence is very pure. I never doubted him. Lin Zhujiu laughed. I never thought that his intentions would change because of old feelings. Compared to Zhang Shiwu, his smile was filled with emotion. Because he had been trapped in the great floating water prison for many years, just living for a thread of hope. He even knew that Yuan Wu and Zheng Xiao had let him live because they wanted to lure out the remnants of the Bazinkendo ground. Su Fu, Yuan Wu, Zhang Shiwu, and Lin Zhujiu were all deeply connected to Ding Ning and Zheng Xiao. But at this time, of all the cultivators in the world, the one with the strongest ripples was 4th Mr. Zhao of the Zhao Sword Furnace. She was like the nameless Grandmaster Yin of Yuyang Commandery, retreating to a nameless mountain forest. But at this time, red light appeared on her body. She looked up and confirmed that the small sword in the sky was about to be activated. She laughed. Her smile was even brighter and prouder than when she had competed fairly with Ding Ning. The starfire sword that the world knew came from falling from the sky like starlight, carrying a terrifying power that was not of this world. But in this farmhouse, the power of the starfire sword did not come from the sky, but from Zheng Xiao. Zheng Xiao's figure faded and twisted in the air. The twisting of light came from the twisting of the air in this space. The diamond-like brilliance emanating from her body had turned into wisps of pale white starfire. This farmhouse turned to dust in a flash, disappearing without a trace. Each tiny thread of starfire turned into a small sword that charged towards Ding Ning. Chapter 847. Ding Ning looked calmly at her. He didn't even move, but countless sword energies spun around him. There seemed to be gaps between these sword energies, but behind the gaps were still extremely thin sword energies. Threads of starfire swords charged at these sword energies, and were crushed like grains of rice thrown into a millstone, turning into insignificant balls of flame. The tiny white flowers on the last flower remnant sword were dying. The silver flames formed by these small starfire swords were also blooming and disappearing. This was his grindstone sword essence, the strongest defensive sword form in the world. It was even stronger than Wang Jingming's attack that Zheng Xiao had learned back then. Yet, both Zheng Xiao and Ding Ning's expressions did not change when they saw the starfire swords being blocked by this sword essence. Zheng Xiao knew that her attack could not kill Ding Ning. Ding Ning also knew that Zheng Xiao had more than one attack. While the silver flames were still forming around Ding Ning, Zheng Xiao's attention landed on the small sword floating in the void and being tempered by the pale, white starfire. This small sword started to fall. It immediately broke through the primal energies of the universe, and along with the starlight, officially entered this world. With a boom, the world shook. A circle of silver light spread through the clouds in all directions. A ring-shaped mountain seemed to appear in the sky. At the center of the mountain, there was a vacuum of yuan qi. There was only a lonely and cold sword light that was crazily falling. The starlight wrapped around this sword light formed an inexplicable connection with the silver flames around Ding Ning. While it was still in the air, countless streams of starlight visible to the naked eye connected from the sword to the silver flames around Ding Ning. The sword thread swimming around Ding Ning's body began to crack. He frowned and quickly reacted to Zheng Xiu's sword light possessing such power. A terrifying pressure started to ripple outwards from his energy sea. But at this time he sensed something interesting. His furrowed brows immediately relaxed. The terrifying life bond power that was about to surge out of his energy sea disappeared. In the depths of Zheng Xiu's eyes, which were illuminated by the pale starfire, a fiery red light appeared. It was just like the sword core in the deepest part of the small sword embryo. She had even concealed this sword from Yuan Wu. She had kept it for when one day she had to face such a situation with Yuan Wu. She had not thought that she would be forced out so early. The true fire of the Zhao sword furnace was the fiercest fire in the world, and her starfire came from outside the world. It was absolute destruction. When these two extreme and different flames forcefully merged together, it would definitely produce a terrifying power. She believed it was enough to break through Ding Ning's defense. However, other than Ding Ning, there was another person in the world who did not think so. In this world, there was a woman who was smaller than her, but she had always been respectfully addressed as Mr. She was the fourth Mr. of the Zhao sword furnace. This sword had originally been her life-bond sword. How proud were the people of the Zhao sword furnace, especially when she had followed in her teacher's footsteps and finally experienced and reached the level her teacher had reached back then, and was even surpassing it. How could she not take back this sword herself? When this sword that contained all of Zheng Xiu's hopes fell into the world, it was time for her to take back her own sword. Fourth Mr. Zhao smiled proudly. The stone ground under her feet started to melt from the presence she gave off, turning into boiling lava. The frantically falling small sword became incomparably clear in her perception. The red light in the deepest part of the small sword embryo started to spread outwards. "Come back!" She let out a low shout. The voice was not loud, but it was determined. It wasn't just the true essence in her body that was ignited. Even her spirit and life force seemed to be completely ignited at this moment, completely connecting with the small sword. Puff! A loud sound was heard. The ring-shaped origin Qi mountain in the sky instantly shattered, turning into countless broken clouds. The sword light at the center suddenly became dazzling red, like an enormous furnace forming in the air. That kind of unimaginably red flame pushed out the pale white flame and the silver starlight together. Zheng Xiu's body started to tremble. This small sword was her true life-bond sword that she had hidden for a long time, but at the same time, it was fourth Mr. Zhao's life-bond sword. Between her and fourth Mr. Zhao, they were fighting with their lives, like they were tearing at each other's flesh. In this moment, her power would not lose to fourth Mr. Zhao. But she could not hold on, because fourth Mr. Zhao had truly put his life on the line. The sword essence of the Zhao sword furnace was so unscrupulous. She could clearly sense that fourth Mr. Zhao would rather lose his life to take back this sword. She wanted to live. She could not die together with fourth Mr. Zhao to fight for this sword. So in this moment, she lost this sword. The unimaginably red small sword proudly pierced out of the pale white ball of fire, dragging an enormous tail of flame as it flew into the distance towards fourth Mr. Zhao. That extremely terrifying power turned into a joke. It was as if it had turned into a leaky leather raft, dancing wildly in the air. The stars were bright, and the most beautiful fireworks bloomed in the sky. Ding Ning looked up at the blossoming fireworks. He was just a spectator and did not need to face Zheng Xiu's sword. Under the fireworks, Zheng Xiu's expression was dim. She could not say that this battle was not fair, because much of the power in this sword did not belong to her. Also, the failure of this sword was because she had not completely subdued this sword. What else? Ding Ning did not look at her. He looked up and asked quietly. The Spirit Spring Immortal Lotus was useless, and fourth Mr. Zhao had taken back the life bond sword that he had been forging for a long time. What else? If there was anything else, then he could only take it out this time. Ding Ning's calm words contained indescribable sarcasm, indescribable power, and pleasure. Because the hardest part about Zheng Xiao was that she always had a trump card. So what else was there now? Zheng Xiao looked coldly at the ground under her feet and did not respond. A bright pillar of starlight fell from the sky towards Ding Ning. At the same time, her body flashed backwards. Ding Ning attacked. The terrifying life bond aura that had just come out of his body was like a real beast rushing out of his body. This was the first time he used the full power of the 9-Death Silkworm and the Great Punishment Sword. Terrifying swallowing sounds sounded in this part of the world. This invincible sword light seemed to be accompanied by countless invisible silkworms, completely devouring the Yuan Qi and even the silent starlight along the way. The sword light reached Zheng Xiao in a flash. Zheng Xiao's clothing was torn to pieces and turned to dust. Her perfect naked body was exposed to the cold air. Chapter 848. The primal energies of the universe tore restlessly and cut faint bloody marks on Zheng Xiao's porcelain white skin. The other had seen her body before, and was even familiar with it. But in this situation, she only felt shame and anger. This was truly the removal of the last piece of cloth. No matter how noble a woman was, when the clothes on her body were gone, she was no different from an ordinary woman. This perfect body was reflected in Ding Ning's eyes. But he did not hesitate. He swung the Great Punishment Sword in front of him. A new power surged out of his body like a volcano as his feet stomped on the ground and slammed out along the life bond sword in his hand. Boom! There seemed to be an enormous mountain between him and Zheng Xiao that was shattered by him. Zheng Xiao let out a shrill cry as a terrifying aura descended from the skies. 7 silvery stars appeared in front of her, unceasingly guiding the astral Yuan Qi descending from the skies. Yet these 7 silver stars could not stop the power of Ding Ning's blow. In the next instant, the 7 silver stars shattered and turned into countless silver rays. Pew! She spat out a mouthful of bloody mist. Her pure white body spun in the air, as fragile as a leaf in a wild wind. She could not hide any of her private parts, and her body was covered in specks of blood. Ding Ning's body broke through the wind, his right hand holding the Great Punishment Sword. The Great Punishment Sword was in front of him, and it broke through all the silver rays in front of him. He used the fingers of his left hand as a sword to guide the last flower remnant sword. This remnant sword burned with an unprecedented fighting spirit, blooming with countless fine white flowers. It had already arrived in front of Zheng Xiao before him. Zheng Xiao looked at the remnant sword that was stabbing towards her heart. The past appearance of the sword's master, Yin Xinlan, appeared in her mind. But in a moment, her eyes that had been filled with humiliation and anger became emotionless again. A layer of soft light rippled on the surface of her body. The remnant sword stabbed between her breasts, but was stopped by this layer of soft light. Her body seemed to grow lighter. She was pushed by the sword energy of this sword and flew backwards at an even faster speed. However, whether it was the farmhouses or the trees along the way, they were all shattered by her smooth back. Her body seemed to be glued to this broken sword. The power of this broken sword continuously seeped out from behind her body. Ding Ning knew why there was such an abnormality. This was the bright and clean body of the Lingshu Sword Gate. It was the most powerful Dharma access in the world for diverting and borrowing force. In a sense, it was even more powerful than his stone-grinding sword manual. But before this, the Lingshu Sword Gate had existed for more than a dozen generations, and there had not been any talented cultivators who could comprehend and use this method. Who would have thought that this method would appear on Zheng Xiao? In terms of talent, even Ding Ning himself might not be able to surpass Zheng Xiao. She was the genius that Jiaodong Commandery had waited hundreds of years for. In the end, they had placed everything on her. However, in Ding Ning's eyes, this seemingly indestructible bright sword was absolutely useless. He only used brute force to break through. There was another great boom in the world. The great punishment sword in his hand carried all the power in his body and hit the hilt of the last flower remnant sword hard. It was as if a giant hammer had struck the nail in Zheng Xiu's chest. When the power was not on the same level, any method lost its meaning. The remnant sword advanced another inch. Just an inch, it pierced through the soft light outside Zheng Xiu's body. The rough and uneven blade stabbed into the flesh between Zheng Xiu's breasts. A thread of blood flowed down her porcelain skin. That ruthless sword intent had already penetrated her body. Ding Ning's body was affected by the strong recoil and paused slightly in the air. Even with such an overwhelming advantage, the power that Zheng Xiu displayed still surpassed his expectations. But what could change the final result? Unless she could reach Realm 8 in this battle. The earlier chase and the use of the spirit lotus seeds had already caused her body's functions to deteriorate. With the addition of this sword strike, she could not instantly break through to Realm 8. Yet even at this time, Ding Ning still maintained great wariness. He understood Zheng Xiu better than anyone. He felt that Zheng Xiu had not given up hope. He sensed that Zheng Xiu still had one last weapon that she had not used. And he was going to squeeze this last thing out of Zheng Xiu. Zheng Xiu's body fell heavily to the ground. More wounds appeared on her body, and more blood flowed out. She was very tired and sleepy. Even more importantly, she did not even have clothes to cover her body. Her sorry state could not be concealed. Yet at this time, she still looked up coldly at Ding Ning and said, "Do you know why I supported you in building those turrets in Chongling back then? Why, after Mo Shoqing died, I spent astounding amounts of manpower and resources to build Chongling's walls." Ding Ning frowned slightly and did not answer. Zheng Xiu looked at him and shook her head. "I did not fear that Chongling would become a battlefield. The later walls were not for defense, but for a possible situation like today. It was so that I could return to Chongling under such circumstances." When she said this, a broken sound came from her mouth. One of her teeth had shattered. At the center of the tooth was a small crystal pillar, a formation pivot carved with seal scripts hard to see with the naked eye. The moment her teeth shattered, the crystal pillar started to turn to powder and disintegrate. The thin yuan qi seemed to have returned to the starry sky. It instantly resonated with several stars in the starry sky. In the distant Chongling, all the turrets started to shake. On the turrets, all the formation masters saw in shock that all the formations started to operate on their own in a way they had never encountered and could not understand. Rays of light shot into the sky from the top of the turrets. The new walls around Chongling gave off an unusual presence and formed an enormous formation with these rays of light. Other than your own power, what is the meaning in using your last resort to return to Chongling? Ding Ning looked calmly at Zheng Xiu and asked. The moment his voice sounded, Zheng Xiu's energy gave off an enormous sound of collapse. The smooth skin of her lower abdomen started to spin strangely like a whirlpool. Deep in her energy sea, the jade palace shattered and collapsed. This meant that her cultivation was almost completely crippled. Countless resplendent starlight surged from her body and shot straight up into the boundless sky, bringing her body up into the air. In this moment, she seemed to turn into a star and fly into the sea of stars. Until the very end, no cultivator would be willing to abandon their cultivation and flee. But Ding Ning did not want to see her disappear from his sight and flee. He had not immediately attacked because he had been channeling all the vital energy and energy he could use. He attacked at this time. Chapter 849. This was the strongest attack he had used since his fight with Zheng Xiu. It was also his strongest attack up until now. When his sword essence started to form, and the power summoned from the world started to form true killing intent, many grandmasters in the world sensed it, including Bai Shanshui in the distant Chu, including 4th Mr. Zhao, who had just put away his life-bond sword. These two grandmasters sensed it at the same time. They could not help but think, who in the world could withstand such a blow? Their thoughts represented the thoughts of all the grandmasters who sensed it. This kind of killing intent made even the grandmasters who were far away feel awe and inexplicable palpitations. In their view, the appearance of this sword meant the end of Ding Ning and Zheng Xiu's battle. Ding Ning's great punishment sword rose towards the endless stars. The ground in front of him silently split open. A wave of nether energy from the depths of the earth erupted from the split earth, bringing with it countless grains of black sand. It was like a door to hell had opened and was waiting for Zheng Xiu's arrival. An incomparably huge sword shadow rose from the ground and swept towards Zheng Xiu, who had already flown into the air. Zheng Xiu gave a muffled grunt. The starlight around her shook violently. The starlight coming from the endless void became blinding in this moment, forming a pillar of light hundreds of feet wide. Under the extreme light, Ding Ning's sword shadow appeared even more nether and dark. The starlight cracked like chains. The broken starlight did not scatter, but wildly danced around the pillar of light like broken chains. In Chongling, the turrets and walls connected to the stars in the sky, and the starlight around Zheng Xiu started to shake violently. The dust between the eaves and the cracks in the walls started to fall like snow. Most people in Chongling did not know what was happening at this time. Under their terrified gazes, the newly built walls were the first to be unable to withstand the energy vibrations and started to show cracks. These cracks made terrifying sounds as they spread on the walls at astounding speed. Then rocks fell from the cracks, and then even larger rocks. The walls started to collapse section by section. Then the turret started to crack. The formation at the center of the turret began to collapse. Starlight overflowed and flowed out of the formation like flowing water, seeping out of the walls through the cracks of the turret. All the turrets in Chongling were lit up by this terrifying light. Ding Ning's hands were extremely steady. Even though the skin on his hands started to crack and blood flowed from his wrists into his sleeves, the nether sword essence from his great punishment sword continued to advance steadily. Countless broken starlight chains lashed out at the giant netherworld sword shadow. In the center of the starlight beam, Zheng Xiu, who felt this resolute cutting intent, suddenly screamed crazily. She had already used all her means. For the first time since she walked out of Jiaodong Commandery and entered Chongling, she could not control her fate and life. She was like a helpless fish on the chopping board and could only be decided by Chongling's formation and Ding Ning's sword. She was well aware of the power of those arrays, but she could not imagine that Ding Ning's sword was still advancing and was still breaking through the enormous power that enveloped her. Ding Ning's body was thrown back. This was an indescribable resistance. In his perception, the immense pressure of this formation seemed to be able to completely crush his body in the next moment. However, at this moment, he also let out a fierce howl. As he shouted, the great punishment sword in his hand turned from a slash to a stab. The vital energy that had been compressed in his body turned into the sharpest sword energy in the world and shot out from the tip of the great punishment sword. The glowing sword energy was squeezed into droplets and then quickly solidified. Crack! This sword energy broke, but it had pierced through the layers of starlight and broke inside the pillar of light. This sword energy spun in front of Zheng Xiu and passed by her. At the same time, Ding Ning's left hand pointed into the sky. The remaining power in his body gathered in the last flower remnant sword along his finger. The last flower remnant sword exploded with a boom, and a section of the sword hilt split open. This remnant small sword carried a mad presence, and an indescribable presence of mutual destruction. It passed through the closing starlight crack and stabbed toward Zheng Xiu's heart meridian. There was a crack. Blood sprayed out from the tip of the sword. This remnant sword was bathed in blood, and even the fine white flowers on the blade appeared unusually beautiful. Zheng Xiu's figure faded into the sky at this moment. There was the afterimage of a jade-white palm between the blades. The palm was penetrated and cut open. This scene stopped in Ding Ning's eyes for a moment and then disappeared. All the starlight falling from the sky disappeared in this moment. The chain-like starlight shattered one after another, turning into countless resplendent specks of light that drifted between the heavens and the earth like silver dust. Zheng Xiu's afterimage also scattered into the silver fragments that filled the sky. It gave people the feeling that she had transformed into countless silver fragments and disappeared from this world. Her yuan qi returned to the starry sky. Ding Ning slowly put away the great punishment sword. He was out of power. He knew that Zheng Xiu had not been killed by his sword. The starlight disappeared. Zheng Xiu's naked body was pulled into the sky where cultivators could not reach. Her porcelain white skin was swallowed by the cold and extinguishing star energy to turn blue-gray, and then covered in a layer of dark frost. In the next moment, she fell into endless darkness and floated down the energy passageway to the ground. She did fall into the Qin realm, yet she knew that the loss of control of the formation had not allowed her to return to Chongling. The only fortunate thing was that she was still alive. When she regained consciousness, she felt her body was extremely cold. She was lying in the mud of the wilderness. In her somewhat blurred vision, she saw countless black tornadoes and countless streams of fire formed from star energy, moving in all directions like giant dragons. The primal energies of the universe in the clouds were disturbed and gave off waves of thunder. She immediately felt lucky. Then she suddenly felt an excessive coldness on her left cheek, colder than any other part of her body. This kind of coldness went deep into her bones on her face and into her senses. She raised her hand with difficulty and subconsciously placed it there. But what she touched was not cold. It was hot and wet. Boiling hot blood flowed down from the wound, but it was quickly frozen by the cold aura around him. But where her fingers touched, flesh and blood were missing, and only bones were left. Her breathing suddenly stopped. She was like a puppet that had been frozen. Her fingers were completely stiff on the bones that she touched and did not move for a long time. At this time, she did not notice that there was a sword wound on the palm of her other hand that had not been raised, almost splitting her entire palm. Chapter 850. Ding Ning sat down. The vast amounts of vital energy in his body had been used up. Just like how an elephant had a harder time getting up after falling to the ground than a small beast, the stronger the power in his body, the more tired and powerless he felt when he was empty. He was so tired that even his bones had an indescribable feeling. Yet he knew that Zheng Xiu would feel worse than him. His last sword strike was a satisfying one, and it had cut off all his anger and resentment. Therefore, his mood at this moment was exceptionally carefree, as all the haze had been removed from his mind. The roar of the soaring snake came from the sky. A female cultivator appeared behind Ding Ning. She was the young master of the Qin country, Ji Qingqing. Many people had come with the soaring snake, but even Zhongsun Qinxue and Qing Yaoyin deliberately fell a step behind. Is she dead? Ji Qingqing was a little perplexed as she asked with a strange expression. No. Ding Ning looked at her and smiled. He shook his head and said, but I fulfilled my promise to you, and cut her face. She is definitely more seriously wounded than you were back then. Also, those spirit lotus seeds are useless to her. Ji Qingqing's body trembled slightly. She was silent for a long time and then slowly said, that is good. Then she held the umbrella and released her vital energy to help Ding Ning block the cold energy. Like a true attendant, she waited at the side for the others to arrive. Ding Ning had fulfilled his promise to her, so she followed the agreement in her heart. Before the grievances between the Bazin Kendo ground and Yuanwu were completely resolved, she would become Ding Ning's attendant. Zheng Xiu finally started to feel pain. Her body started to let her feel pain. Not just the wounds on her face, the enormous wound on her left hand, and the skin and flesh all over her body were in great pain. Although she was able to control the astral yuan qi, the astral yuan qi wasn't something that belonged to this world. Her control over the astral yuan qi was akin to playing with fire when she was young. When the intensity of the fire was within her control, she would feel warmth. But when the intensity of the fire was out of her control, it would ignite her clothes and burn her body. This was akin to torture. The star energy she had accumulated for many years in the formation she had set up in Chongling had formed a star bridge that allowed her to rise into the sky. Even though it had been cut apart by Ding Ning in the end, she had still managed to escape and land safely. But the exceptionally powerful star energy was out of her control. The star energy that had entered her body was like the burning she had felt when she was young. The jade palace in her energy sea was shattered, and her cultivation was crippled. She could not resist the pain caused by the energy's corrosion. More importantly, her body had already developed a resistance to the world's best healing medicine, the spirit spring immortal lotus seed. Even if she had the spirit lotus seed in her hands, she would not be able to heal. Also, she was naked right now, and did not even have a piece of cloth to bandage her wounds. She looked at her left hand that was almost split in half. Her lips started to tremble, and her good right hand started to tremble. Then she gritted her teeth and pulled off dozens of dried grass. Using her teeth and right hand, she twisted them into a rope and tied her left hand. Then she used all her power to stand up. She felt countless needles stabbing into her bones from the bottom of her feet. Her legs started to tremble. She saw her skin was like leather that had failed to be tanned, covered in blue-black, festering wounds. Some blood vessels appeared on her skin, as though they would scramble to burrow out of her skin in the next breath. The places on her body that had once made all women in the world extremely beautiful could be described as tragic. Finally, she couldn't bear it any longer and let out a shrill roar like that of a wounded beast. No one noticed. This was a wilderness far from Chongling. Because she had started to recruit soldiers last spring, all the counties of the Qin dynasty lacked enough labor. Many of the original farmlands were barren and covered in weeds. Many places in the Qin had not snowed yet. This wilderness was the same. The long grass was yellow and frozen by the cold energy. It looked even more miserable. In her sight, there was only a village in the distance to the left. Her howl caused the dogs in the village to bark. A long time later, Zheng Xiao started to walk towards the village. Her knees were very soft. She even felt that her legs were as soft as the noodles of Chongling. The distance that usually did not count as distance to her became extremely far. After an unknown amount of time, she finally entered the village. Her feet and legs were cut by the weeds and brambles. The smell of fresh blood and her heavy panting attracted the attention of the Shiba Inu dogs in the village. A few dogs jumped out from under the eaves or behind the corners of the house and rushed toward her. However, before they could even get close, these dogs could already smell danger. They could feel the aura of star origin chi rippling from her body. These dogs immediately tucked their tails, whimpered, and ran away. She walked to a pear tree in front of a courtyard. There were some women's clothes hanging there. But perhaps because of the dog's strange howls, or because her footsteps and breathing were too heavy, before her hand touched the coarse cloth, the door to the courtyard opened with a creak. A woman who was still holding some vegetables in her hand walked out. When she saw Zheng Xiao's face, the woman took a step back in fear. She opened her mouth to scream. At this time, Zheng Xiao instinctively reached out with her hands. In her subconscious, this woman would be killed by her in the next moment. She did not want this woman to scream, and did not want anyone who saw her like this to live. But there was a soft sound in the air in front of her hands, and the power only brushed the hair in front of the woman's forehead. The woman's scream exploded in the air. In the next moment, Zheng Xiao was in front of her and grabbed her throat. Zheng Xiao's mind was blank. Her hands were constantly exerting strength, but this was her weakest moment. There was no new power in her body. Her body was so weak she almost leaned against the woman's chest. The woman's face turned purple, and she could not make a sound. Many shouts and angry shouts sounded in the surrounding courtyards. Where did this crazy woman come from? There was a bang, followed by an angry curse. Zheng Xiao was knocked to the ground by a piece of dry wood. The light in front of her eyes disappeared, and the world started to darken. The woman, who was still in shock, began to cry in fear. There were sounds of disdain. Zheng Xiao could not see clearly. In her remaining consciousness, she seemed to have been kicked twice. Then she curled up and seemed to have been dragged to a nearby pile of wood. After a long time, someone took pity on her and took an old garment to cover her. Sinful. How could you be so crazy and end up like this? This was the voice of an old woman. Zheng Xiu's body trembled. She was like a crazy woman and beggar, curling up under the old garment. Chapter 851. As the sun was about to rise, Zheng Xiu smelled the scent of smoke. The people in the village had already started their day of work. In her daze, she heard footsteps. She quickly became alert, and her mind cleared. An old woman sighed as she walked over, carrying a crude porcelain bowl. The bowl was filled with steaming red noodle soup with chopped green onions and sesame oil floating on top. Zheng Xiu put on her clothes and sat up. She started to eat the noodles. When she finished all the noodles in the bowl and drank the noodle soup, her body started to warm up and her limbs started to gain strength. "I pardon you," she said to the old woman who had come back to collect the bowl. "What nonsense are you spouting? You have sinned." The old woman shook her head. Looking at this crazy woman, she felt pity. She could not help but want to take off those thick clothes and old quilts to prevent this crazy woman from freezing to death. But Zheng Xiu had already stood up. Under the old woman's shocked gaze, Zheng Xiu walked to the place where she had been knocked down yesterday. She took off a large robe that had been hanging out to dry and put it on. Then she stuck a bamboo pole used to dry clothes into the ground and broke it with one hand. The crisp sound of the bamboo pole breaking was ear-piercing in this morning. The woman from yesterday quickly walked out of the yard. Seeing Zheng Xiu holding a broken bamboo pole, the woman's eyes widened in terror. But she was not able to make a sound, because the broken bamboo pole in Zheng Xiu's hand had pierced her throat. Even without the support of vital energy, Zheng Xiu was still a grandmaster in other aspects. Other than power, this strike was still beyond the reach of most cultivators in the world in many aspects. The bamboo pole that had just been broken was blunt and had many cuts of different lengths. Therefore, the wound on the woman's throat was very terrifying. Blood spurted out from the wound with a sizzling sound. A shrill cry of surprise rang out. The one who had shouted was the old woman holding the bowl of noodles. The entire village was awakened by the old woman's scream. More shouts and angry shouts sounded. But Zheng Xiu, who was covered in blood, did not show any emotion. She woodenly turned around, and the bamboo pole in her hand pierced the throat of a man who had jumped behind her. The sound of blood gushing out along with the air flow was heard again. More and more people with all kinds of farming tools rushed over. Some people threw stones at her from afar. But when she started to move, nothing could land on her body. The bamboo threads on the blunt end of the bamboo pole in her hand had been ground flat by the flesh and blood. Everyone in her line of sight had fallen into a pool of blood, except for the old woman. "I said I would pardon you for your disrespect." She looked at the old woman who was already speechless and said softly, "Crazy woman. You son of a b*****. The old woman suddenly cried and threw the bowl in her hand at Zheng Xiu. Then, she rushed toward Zheng Xiu. For some reason, Zheng Xiu did not dodge this time. The bowl smashed onto her body and shattered into pieces. She was slightly dazed for a moment, but the bamboo pole in her hand still flew out and pierced the old woman's throat. "I have already pardoned you, but you do not want to," she said to the old woman's corpse. Smelling the scent of food, she walked into a farmhouse, drank a bowl of noodle soup, and ate a dry film. Then she changed into clean clothing, bandaged the wound on her hand, and walked out of the village. When the wounds in her body did not worsen, when her vital energy could not recover, but her strength recovered, Zheng Xiu's mind grew clear. She thought of a person. She felt that this person might be able to help her recover her strength in a different way, or in other words, allow her to recover her ability to cultivate. A long time after she left the village, many farmers who had returned from the distant fields found the terrible state of the village and screamed at the top of their lungs. A group of Qin dynasty cavalry quickly arrived. These soldiers were shocked by the terrible state. They furiously started to search, but did not expect that this was done by the mistress of Chongling. Zheng Xiu identified the direction. When the sky grew dark, she came to a small town. She covered her face. Taking advantage of the darkness, she snuck into the home of a rich merchant, easily assassinated everyone in the house, and threw their corpses into the well. Then she ate dinner, washed her body, and changed into a warm fur robe. She wrote a secret letter and went out in the night. In front of a seemingly ordinary farmer's house, she placed this secret letter under a dilapidated statue of a god of earth. Then, she slightly moved a few inconspicuous stones in front of the statue. Then she returned to the rich merchant's home and started to wait. Jiaodong Commandery was lost, and even her cultivation was lost. But close to Chongling, the methods Jiaodong Commandery used to send messages were still there, and the spies loyal to her were still there. Her secret letter would quickly be sent out. In the end, her intentions would reach Su Qin, who was important in the Qi dynasty right now. She didn't know how strong Su Qin was at this time, but she knew that Su Qin was an extremely greedy cub. She believed that Su Qin would accept her deal. She told Su Qin about the Starfire Sword and some of the special cultivation methods of Jiaodong Commandery, and Su Qin told her about the yin and ghost methods she needed. Her body could not endure normal cultivation methods, but the yin and ghost methods of the Qi dynasty might be able to turn her body into a monster that walked the border between life and death. She felt that with her talent and methods, she would be able to slowly recover her strength. However, these were all her best fantasies. She overlooked a person who had once grasped many methods of Jiaodong Commandery, and this person was now with Hu Hai. This was an avenger who was willing to give up his cultivation and change his appearance. Now, he did not just know some of the channels of Jiaodong Commandery, he also knew many of the channels to send messages in Chongling. So the contents of Zheng Xiu's secret letter did not quickly reach Su Qin's hands as she intended, but this person knew immediately. This person easily knew where she was after escaping from the Yin territory. From the news from the Yin territory, and even the contents of the secret letter, he could easily infer Zheng Xiu's present situation. In the imperial palace of the Qin dynasty, Zhao Gao started to bathe and change clothes. He solemnly changed into new robes. Then he left the imperial palace and rode a carriage with some death soldiers who could kill Zheng Xiu to where she was. At this time, in the eyes of everyone in the imperial palace, he was just a medical official. While he started to have some power because of Hu Hai and his own methods, he was not a cultivator. But today, what puzzled the men of sacrifice following him was that he had also brought a sword with him. Only Zhao Gao knew. He finally waited for the time. He would personally kill this demon that came out of Jiaodong Commandery. Chapter 852. Chongling was in chaos. More than half of the giant turrets had collapsed that night. Even the newly built city walls had collapsed in many places. The Yuanwu Emperor was in Guangzhou. The main forces of the Qin dynasty were chasing the retreating Yin and Qi armies. Zhao Gao had left the imperial palace in an ordinary carriage. No powerful people would care about the movements of a medical official. Except for one person. A similarly ordinary carriage arrived next to Zhao Gao's carriage. Sitting in this carriage was Chief Inspector Chun of the Astrology Bureau. The ordinary carriage, because of his existence, was filled with an indescribable gloomy aura, as if there were countless invisible moss growing in the air. "What do you want to do?" Chief Inspector Chun asked directly. "Can you ensure that no one knows you are leaving Chongling? If you cannot, do not follow me," Zhao Gao answered. Chief Inspector Chun frowned and said, "In present Chongling, very few people will leave the Astrology Bureau without knowing. But when people of the Astrology Bureau leave, very few people will know. As for me, if I want to leave, no one will know." Zhao Gao said simply, "Then follow." Chief Inspector Chen did not ask more. When they left Chongling and passed through the countryside along the Wei River, Zhao Gao said, "Kill Zheng Xiu." When vital energy disappeared from the body, all bodily functions would weaken, including perception. Zheng Xiu's perception weakened greatly. When she sensed the aura of some cultivators, the sound of footsteps could already be heard outside her bedroom. The presence closest to her was very familiar to her. Her breathing started to become uneven. The whole world seemed to have turned dark, and moss seemed to be growing between her chest and lungs. The door easily disappeared. It seemed to decay and turn to dust. Zheng Xiu sat up from the bed. She looked at Chief Inspector Chun at the door and finally confirmed that her perception was not wrong. She did not know what to do. She had never thought that the person who appeared here was the bureau chief of the Astrology Bureau. When Chief Inspector Chun saw her for the first time, his heart also shook violently. He looked at the terrifying wounds on her face and her discolored skin. He had never thought that the high and mighty mistress of Chongling would one day become like this. Zhao Gao's perception had deteriorated even more than Zheng Xiu's, and his body had gradually become not much different from an ordinary person's. He only followed after Chief Inspector Chen locked onto this courtyard. However, when he walked past the well, he still smelled the scent of blood and sensed the corpses in the well. Thinking about the information he had received along the way, he knew that the village that had been massacred must have something to do with Zheng Xiu. What about his real family? Had he been killed so carelessly by the people of Jiaodong Commandery? Without any pity, it was as if he was casually stepping on some ants on the road. Is human life really so worthless in your eyes? He walked to Chief Inspector Chen's side, looked at his former mistress, and asked. Zheng Xiu looked at him. She took a long time to remember that this person seemed to be the doctor who had treated Hu Hai. She did not understand why the other party would follow Bureau Chief Chen to her, and why he would say such a thing. Who are you? She could not help but ask. You should know me, but you did not recognize me. Zhao Gao bowed to her. He had made this bow countless times in front of her. It's you? Zheng Xiu finally remembered who he was, and her eyes filled with shock and disbelief. Zhao Gao straightened his body. He slowly said, Now, it is time for you to pay the debt you owe me. Zheng Xiu's face paled. In this moment, she was angry, but in the next moment, she was terrified. She turned to look at Chief Inspector Chen and suddenly laughed harshly. Why are you doing this? Do I have a grudge against you? Because of Yi Sealing. Chief Inspector Chen was silent for a moment, and then said, At the beginning, it was because of her, then because of Mo Shouqing, because of Huang Jinwei and myself. Betrayed. You all betrayed. All of Chongling betrayed, but I did not know. Zheng Xiu suddenly laughed crazily, looking at this crazy woman who could not be connected to that cold mistress. Chief Inspector Chen took a deep breath and said slowly, You should now understand how Wang Jingming felt back then. A bright sword light shone. Zhao Gao unsheathed his sword and stabbed at her. His cultivation in the past could not compare to Zheng Xiu, but he had once been a powerful cultivator, and he had not been wounded. Zheng Xiu would have had a hard time blocking his attack. Especially at this time, Zheng Xiu's mind was in turmoil. There was a soft sound. This sword pierced through Zheng Xiu's abdomen and caused her body to arch backwards. Blood gushed out of the grooves on the sword, rushed to Zhao Gao's hand, and then dyed half of his body red. Zheng Xiu screamed, but she could not die. Because Zhao Gao did not want her to die so easily, his attack had avoided her vitals. Zhao Gao's left hand reached out and grabbed Zheng Xiu's throat. Zheng Xiu could not even scream. Her body curled and spasmed. She was like a dog right now. There was no pity in Zhao Gao's eyes. He thought of his family. Maybe they had been killed like dogs in the past, and now he was going to kill Zheng Xiu like a dog. He pulled out the sword in Zheng Xiu's body and was going to cut down again. Ding Ning helped you take revenge. You do not want to help him? At this time, Zheng Xiu suddenly stopped struggling and laughed crazily, squeezing out the words from her throat. Zhao Gao stopped and released his grip on Zheng Xiu. Zheng Xiu's eyes were already a little unfocused, but her crazy smile only grew stronger. Yuan Wu, and I once used some people he cared about to force him into Chongling. You can keep me alive and force Yuan Wu to make some exchanges. Her voice was very clear at this time. I want to see what Yuan Wu will do. Zhao Gao grew silent. He did not want to delay any longer, but he agreed to Zheng Xiu's request. He threw down the sword in his hand. Since you want to be sure that you made the wrong choice between Yuan Wu and Wang Jingming back, then, since you want to feel despair about this world again, then I will fulfill your wish. He sneered, and then started to bandage Zheng Xiu's wounds. He was a medical officer now. He could ensure that Zheng Xiu would not die, but he could also ensure that Zheng Xiu would never become a cultivator again. He was even more certain that when Zheng Xiu truly died, it would be more painful than now. Chapter 853. Ding Ning was still in the Yin territory. When he received a secret letter from Qin Jing, the person sitting across from him was Xie Changxing. Ever since the Yin and Qi went against his wishes to attack the Qin, Ding Ning did not want to interfere in the war between the Yin, Qi, and Qin. As to killing Yi Xinhe, dealing with the Netherfloat fleet, and chasing Zheng Xiu, this was Ding Ning resolving his own grievances and not interfering in the war between the Yin and Qin. Of course, this unknowingly helped the Yin. Otherwise, the terracotta soldiers of the Nether Floats would wreak havoc in the Yin territory. The Yin army, who had already been retreating in the Qin lands, would have been utterly defeated. Even so, the Yin territory was in chaos right now. It was just slightly better than when the imperial city of the Chu had been taken. For a merchant like Xie Changsheng, the more chaotic it was, the more chances there were to make a profit. Compared to when he was studying in Chongling, the present Xie Changsheng was extremely low-key. He traveled in the Chu and Yin lands. In order to distance himself from Guanzhong, he even pretended that he was a descendant of the former Qin imperial family and changed his name to Qin Sheng. The power he possessed now was not in proportion to his low-key behavior. Right now, in the Chu and Yin lands, the one with the most military power was most likely not any general or marquis of the Yin or Chu, but him. Such a prodigal and such a speed of growth made Ding Ning sigh with emotion. What made him even more emotional was that Xie Changsheng's conduct had not changed. The tea in front of Xie Changsheng and him was the old tree silver needle tea that the Yin produced in a year. Also, it was old tea that had been aged for 10 years and tasted at its best. There were 2 small dots to go with the tea. One was the Yin North Gu East Golden Thread Blood Swallow's Nest that only the Yin imperial family had the chance to enjoy. The other was the 5-spice jerky from the Yin capital. That's not just comparable to a household's endowment. Facing Ding Ning's teasing, Xie Changxing smiled disdainfully. I eat the exquisite, not the price. It is better to give these things to me than to other people. Luxury is the same in my eyes. They are just 2 dots. It is better for me to eat them than those nouveau riche. Ding Ning could not help but laugh at this. When he opened the secret letter in his hand, he couldn't help but smile emotionally. What is it? Xie Changxing felt that his smile was a bit strange. He couldn't help but frown, put down the teacup in his hand, and asked. Ding Ning did not answer his question immediately. Instead, he asked softly, Do you believe in karma? Businessmen only believe in interest. Xie Changxing sneered. Zheng Xiu still couldn't escape. Ding Ning took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. She fell into Zhao Gao's hands. That's very satisfying. Xie Changxing stilled slightly and said with slight disdain, You made Chongling seem like it was the end of the world. I had not expected you to not be able to escape in the end and waste your efforts. Ding Ning was a little emotional. He said seriously, I thought that with her temperament, she would try to hide and not come out. Even if her cultivation was completely destroyed, she would definitely find a way to cultivate again. I didn't expect that she would fall into Zhao Gao's hands so quickly. Xie Changxing put away his smile and looked seriously at him. He asked, She is dead? Ding Ning shook his head and said coolly, She has one last request. She wants to see Yuan Wu's intentions. What is there to see about someone like Yuan Wu's intentions? Xie Changxing raised an eyebrow and said with his usual poisonous tongue, Does she want to disgust herself or deliberately disgust Yuan Wu? Regardless, this is a good show for me. Back then, Yuan Wu used despicable methods to force you into the city. Now, let's see how he, as a husband, treats his captured wife. Seeing Ding Ning remain silent, Xie Changxing asked, Since you have Zheng Xiu, what conditions are you prepared to give Yuan Wu? Ding Ning raised his head and drank the golden thread blood swallow's nest in the jade bowl. Then he said calmly, If the conditions are too great, people will think that we are purposely making things difficult. We will only make a small request and see if Yuan Wu is willing. Xie Changxing looked helplessly at him. You're still like falling parasol. Can't you just say what you want to say? I'm not in a hurry. Ding Ning smiled slightly and pointed at the old tea boiling on the red mud stove. He said, "If you are impatient, you will not be able to drink good soup. I have waited for more than a decade. I have to think clearly. I feel that the sword formation under Su Fu is not bad." Xie Changsheng was not restrained at all because of Ding Ning's change in status. He could not help but mock. Yi Shina is finished, the Nether Float fleet is finished, the terracotta soldiers are finished. Zheng Xiu's cultivation is crippled. Right now, to you and the Bazinkindo ground, the only threats are Su Fu's sword formation of boys and girls, Yuan Wu, and your heaven-defying senior sect brother Su Qin. Su Fu's cultivation is not a secret and is not a threat to you. What you want to deal with the most is this sword formation. Why are you still trying to be mysterious? Ding Ning could not help but laugh. Businessmen are good at everything, but they are too smart and not reserved. It is hard to chat with them. Straightforwardness is a good thing, but it is easy to appear too rich and not elegant enough. I am not a grandmaster, Xie Changxing said disdainfully. I only know how to go with the flow. In my view, this is the best time to open a path between Jiaodong Commandery and Yin, Qi, and Chu. To be able to go with the flow and grasp the situation, you are a true grandmaster. Ding Ning looked at Xie Changxing and said softly, "Right now, the Qin army is chasing the Yin and Qi armies. The three armies cannot attend to Jiaodong Commandery and Chu. The Nether Float fleet has been destroyed and cannot cover the retreat or attack Jiaodong Commandery when our main forces leave Jiaodong Commandery. This is the best time to control all of Chu. Lin Zhujia will join forces with you. First kill Yi Xinhe, and then lure out Zheng Xiu and the Nether Float fleet. Destroy the Nether Float fleet and the Terracotta army, and remove the threat of a surprise attack. Then Jiaodong will send troops to take back Chu. Next, destroy Su Fu's sword formation. Ding Ning, your chess pieces look messy, but each step is tightly connected. Then, after you destroy Su Fu's sword formation, can you take Chongling directly?" Xie Changxing thought clearly now and was full of admiration. "Did you not say that there is also my great senior sect brother who is a threat to us?" Ding Ning looked at him, and then at the secret letter in his hand, and smiled meaningfully. "It seems that I did not say anything about him." Xie Changxing stilled slightly, and then smiled self-deprecatingly. "It seems that he will have nothing to do with us soon. It is really shocking that a senior sect brother of White Goat Cave can stand in such a position so quickly." Ding Ning looked at him and said, "But he is not the only senior sect brother of White Goat Cave that surprises me." Xie Changxing's mouth twitched as he continued. "Not to mention your senior sect brother Zhang, he is a true gentleman. He can persuade people to do good. It's not bad to let him do the right thing. I'm just afraid that he will be wishy-washy and not Su Qin's match." Chapter 854. Hearing Xie Changxing's words, Ding Ning smiled and said, "Do you want to make a bet? You think I'm an idiot?" Xie Changxing immediately shook his head. "Even Zheng Xiu could not beat you in a bet, and I bet with you?" While he was arrogant, he knew his limits. Zheng Xiu had lost miserably, but he could not deny that she was a rare hero in history, and he could not compare to her. Also, Zheng Xiu had only lost miserably after defeating Wang Jingming in the past. Of course, he did not feel that he could win against Zheng Xiu. "Then I will wait for the show to start." Xie Changxing looked at the snowy plains of Yin and sighed before leaving. "I am really as lonely as the snow. Spending money casually changed the situation of the world and was recorded in the history books. Stop putting on airs and blowing your own trumpet." Ding Ning was angry and amused at the same time. He casually rolled up a stream of snow and threw him out, causing him to somersault heavily. "The history books will record that I am the only one who could withstand a blow from Wang Jingming and not be wounded at all." Xie Changxing ate a mouthful of snow but did not look back. He snickered and waved his hand at Ding Ning. Ding Ning looked at his back and put away his smile. Jing Liuli's figure appeared in his mind. Xie Changxing and the young geniuses he was familiar with, no matter how unruly they were, always followed the rules of the world. But Jing Liuli was not the same. As long as she did what she thought was right, she would not care about any rules. This was what he was truly worried about. Many years ago in Chongling, he was not good at judging people. But after being in the darkness for many years and being reborn, he was very good at judging people. His intuition was also very accurate. At this time, Jing Lioli, who he was worried about, was under a peach tree. In the winter, the peach tree had already withered to the point that not a single leaf was left. However, this peach tree was very old and very large. Furthermore, it was situated beside a quiet little lake. Yet it still had a kind of simple and magnificent scenery. Her injuries had yet to recover. She was wearing a thick cotton gown, and her face was a little blue from the cold. She didn't look much different from those ordinary girls with weak bodies. Dugabai looked at Jing Lioli under the peach tree. He did not understand what Jing Lioli was thinking. Behind him was a bamboo building, small and exquisite. All of the items were very particular, including the iron pot he was using to cook the porridge, which came from outside Yin Mountain. The silver spoon used to stir the porridge came from the Chu Territory's workshop, Heavenly Craftsman Residence. This workshop had nothing to do with the war. Everything it produced was useless for cultivators, but useful for the daily necessities of nobles. For example, the runes engraved on the silver spoon would naturally release some yuan qi. This vital energy would cause the kanji to boil more evenly, making it harder for the rice grains to break and making the kanji more fragrant and clear. The porridge had just boiled, and the silver spoon had just been put in, when a terrifying, killing intent suddenly surged from the peach forest on the side of the lake. Dugu Bai was not unfamiliar with this killing intent. It came from the female assassin who followed Li Si, Mu Hongyan. In the past few weeks, it was because of this terrifying assassin that he and Jing Lioli had survived. Even those famous grandmasters in the world were not a match for this female assassin. But today, the killing intent disappeared in an instant, clearly out of fear, and silently hiding in the forest. Assassins were different from death warriors and attendants. When they sensed an opponent they could not defeat, what they did was not sacrifice their lives, but hide, flee, and search for another chance to assassinate. But who could make someone like Mu Hongyan lose confidence in an instant? Dugabai turned around in shock. Then he saw two figures. A man dressed in ordinary coarse cloth robes, and a young cultivator following behind him like a shadow. Dugabai's breathing immediately stopped. He had received the answer. The Yuanwu Emperor walked out of the peach forest. Huang Jinwei walked in the same pace as him in the shadow behind him. The Yuanwu Emperor looked at the frozen Dugabai, but his expression did not change. He said softly, "The people of the Duga Marquisate establishment are not ordinary people." Jing Lioli, who had been looking at the calm lake, stood up. She shook her hand hard to get rid of the coldness on her body. Then she looked up at Yuanwu, who was much taller than her, and asked, "Why do you want to see me?" Hearing her words, Dugabai's relaxed hands suddenly stiffened, and his heart sank. The Yuanwu Emperor did not immediately answer her. He turned to look at where Mu Hongyan's killing intent had suddenly appeared and then disappeared. He said, "Minister Li's subordinates have all followed you. I think it is because you want to complete what Minister Li wants to do." Jing Lioli said with slight disdain, "Of Minister Li's subordinates, only she has followed me. Of course, only she counts as Minister Li's true subordinate. She alone is enough." Yuanwu smiled faintly. His finger moved slightly, and a white light fell towards Jing Lioli. When the white light landed in Jing Lioli's hand, the spirit energy rippled. It was a clear spirit spring, immortal lotus seed. Originally, this Lonely One's Empress gave Su Fu a spirit lotus seed, but this Lonely One did not give it to Su Fu. Now, Su Fu thinks that this spirit lotus seed is more useful to you. Yuanwu looked at Jing Lioli and said calmly, "Other than this Lonely One will tell you all the cultivation theories I know, including some of the unique cultivation methods of the imperial family. Ding Ning has taught you cultivation. You are the best disciple of Min Mountain Sword Sect. So in a certain sense, you will be the direct disciple of Wang Jingming, Bailey Sushue, and this Lonely One." Jing Lioli just listened quietly. These words did not cause any ripples in her mind. "What do you want me to do?" She continued to look up into Yuan Wu's eyes and asked, "Destroy the yin." Yuan Wu said simply, "If the yin dies, the qi will die. The Qin dynasty will rule the world. This is what Minister Li wants to do the most." Jing Liuli shook her head. "You are paying too much, because this lonely one does not have confidence." The Yuan Wu emperor slowly exhaled and looked in the direction of Jiaodong Commandery with his hands behind his back. There is no news of the empress. In the past many years, this lonely one has never fought alone and has never lacked confidence. Jing Liuli smiled scornfully. "You think that I will help you against Ding Ning in the future? That is just a possibility." The Yuan Wu emperor also smiled scornfully. "In the future, if this lonely one truly loses to him, there must be at least one person in the world who will not do as he thinks, or rather, someone who dares to be his enemy. Not if they will, but if they dare." Chapter 855. If you say so, then the key is whether you dare to teach me. Jing Liuli put away her mocking smile. She looked at the Yuan Wu emperor without any emotion on her face. "If I have the chance, I will kill you first. This lonely one believes that Wang Jingming will act faster than you." The Yuan Wu emperor laughed. "In other words, if he cannot kill this lonely one after killing him, this lonely one will immediately kill you." Jing Liuli did not say anything else. She ate what might be the last spirit spring immortal lotus seed in the world, like she was eating an ordinary candy. The lakeside was very quiet. Even the fish in the lake did not sense the murderous energy. Also, because of the attraction of the spirit lotus seed, many large fish that had been at the bottom of the lake due to the cold swam to this side of the shore. The fish pecked gently at the coldness of the lake and created ripples. A fresh presence bloomed in Jing Liuli's body. The decadent presence in her body quickly disappeared. A strange light revived in her body. Even Dugu Bai, who was frozen in front of the bamboo building, could clearly sense that she was growing stronger. Dugu Bai looked at Jing Liuli, whose face was gradually turning red. Sensing this strange change, he started to understand many things, including Jing Liuli's current changes. The spirit spring immortal lotus seed could only heal quickly and nourish the energies. Jing Liuli's presence was changing because her previous injuries had concealed the fact that she had been growing stronger in these days. From fleeing from Li Mountain until now, facing the assassins and the powerful cultivators who wanted to kill her, while she rarely fought, in terms of her understanding of cultivation, swordsmanship, sword essence, and many other aspects, she was rapidly growing. She was the most talented cultivator in Changling's history. Killing Li Si was like the last barrier she needed to break through. After that, she seemed to have completely unlocked her shackles and had been advancing rapidly. Yuan Wu flicked a hand, and a yellowed scroll landed in Jing Liuli's hands. Then his lips moved slightly. Dugu Bai could not hear anything. Clearly, Yuan Wu was sending a message into Jing Liuli's ears, explaining some matters. This process lasted for a few minutes. Dugu Bai lowered his head slightly and looked at the porridge in the pot. The porridge gradually dried up, turning into an ugly, sticky pile. The fire in the cauldron gradually extinguished. Otherwise, even with that unique silver spoon, the bottom of the pot would be completely burnt and give off an unpleasant smell. Yuan Wu turned and left, including Huang Jinwei, who followed him like a shadow. The porridge is rotten, but it is still edible. Jing Liuli did not look in the direction Yuan Wu had left. Her gaze landed on the pot next to Dugu Bai. Then she said in her usual calm tone, "Eat first." If this was any other time, Dugu Bai would start to scoop porridge for her. But today, hearing Jing Liuli's words, he did not move. He glanced at the lake behind Jing Liuli, took a deep breath, and slowly asked, "You stopped here not because this is where Yi Xin has lived for a long time, and not because you want to see some of Yi Xin's traces of sword practice to comprehend, but because you are waiting for Yuan Wu to meet you. So you have made an appointment with Yuan Wu long ago." Jing Liuli's expression did not change. She looked calmly at Dugu Bai, not shaking her head or nodding. "I have seen the traces of Yi Xin's sword practice and have comprehended it. As to staying here to wait for Yuan Wu, That is also one aspect. Very different. Dugu Bai was silent for a long time before he said this. Jing Liuli frowned slightly and said, "What is very different?" "It is very different to talk to Yuan Wu." Dugu Bai looked at her and said, "Why can't I talk to him?" Jing Liuli looked at him and asked in response. Dugu Bai was silent for a long time, but he did not want to use this time to think of a rebuttal to Jing Liuli. He just thought that he needed some time to make a decision if he really had to say some words. "This is a matter of position," he said slowly. "Simply speaking, it is friend and foe. There are boundaries in people's hearts from the start. It is clear to me who is friend and who is foe. In my view, I am naturally Ding Ning's friend, a friend of the Bazin Kendo ground and Min Mountain Sword sect. If I knew that Yuan Wu might appear here, or that Yuan Wu wanted to talk to me, then my first thought would not be to make a deal with him, but to inform the Bazin Kendo ground to ambush and assassinate him. But you did not. I fear that you have guessed some of his intentions. You just waited here quietly and did nothing." After saying this, Dugu Bai looked at Jing Liuli, who did not speak. He then asked, "Now that you have accepted some of his cultivation methods, will you really help him against the yin?" Jing Liuli nodded. "I will go against the yin." Dugu Bai suddenly felt sad and could not speak. "But I will not make a deal with him. From the moment I killed Li Si, I wanted to destroy the yin and qi." Jing Liuli looked at him and said, "But have you ever thought that as we fled Li Mountain, many yin and qi cultivators came? Without their help, even with Mu Hongyan, we could not have escaped the pursuit of those Qin cultivators and the Qin army." Dugu Bai looked at her with a pale face. "But after this, you will go to the yin and cannot avoid fighting them. The times are different. They came to save us because they had a common enemy," Jing Liuli said. "The general situation is like this, but under this general situation, each of us cultivators is an individual. We have our own likes and dislikes, and our own choices. Some people can turn back and kill the comrades they once fought with, but some people will always remember old friendships. They will use all means and guard a boundary in their hearts. This is the difference between Yuan Wu and the Bazin Kendo ground." Dugu Bai looked at Jing Liuli, his lips trembling. "I fear that one day, you will be as cold as Zheng Xiao. Is this a warning before parting?" Jing Liuli looked down slightly and said coolly, "So you will not accompany me to the yin, and will not help me destroy the yin?" "Why must I destroy the yin?" Dugu Bai grew angry and said, "Will the yin not be destroyed if you do not do it? Long delays have many dreams, and with me acting, it will be faster," Jing Liuli said slowly. Dugu Bai laughed angrily. "And in the end?" He looked at Jing Liuli. "If one day you feel that what the Bazin Kendo ground and Min Mountain Sword sect do is not to your liking, will you attack them?" Jing Liuli looked at him and shook her head. "I know that in the future, I will follow my heart." Dugu Bai was furious, but then he suddenly felt even more sad. He lowered his head, took a step back, and then turned. He said softly, "Take care." Jing Liuli looked at him. She knew he was leaving, but she pressed her lips together and did not speak. Chapter 856. Dugu Bai's figure finally disappeared from Jing Liuli's sight. The porridge was still warm. She started to eat the porridge. While the porridge was dry, she had recovered from her wounds and her appetite had increased. It was still very fresh and sweet. Mu Hongyan's figure slowly appeared from the forest by the lake. She walked in front of Jing Liuli and bowed slightly. Then she looked in the direction the Yuanwu Emperor had left and said softly, "He is killing intent, but not towards you or me." Jing Liuli thought and said, "His killing intent will not be towards Dugu Bai." Mu Hongyan looked at the dry porridge in her bowl and frowned slightly. She said, "Why?" "Because at least before I go to deal with the yin, he will not make me unhappy. He knows that if he kills Dugu Bai, I will be unhappy." Jing Liuli responded coolly, "Dugu Bai and his friends are too weak for him and not worth him acting." Just like how she was certain Mu Hongyan's senses were not wrong, Jing Liuli was certain that Yuanwu would not want to kill Dugu Bai. But in this world, there were not many people worthy of Yuanwu personally killing. Then who would he kill? Also, this person should not be far from here. Otherwise, Yuanwu would not have shown a thread of killing intent when he left for Mu Hongyan to sense. Jing Liuli was a true genius, especially after cultivating with Ding Ning and Chongling. She had made unimaginable progress in grasping people's hearts. The Yuanwu Emperor had not just asked her to meet alone. Also, people like Yuanwu would not be willing to waste time, especially after he discovered that Ding Ning was the former Wang Jingming. His time became even more precious. Yi Shina's secret residence was by the lake of Peach Blossom Lake. The other person he wanted to meet was not far from the lake in a tea garden that Yi Xinhe had once liked to visit. Ever since the change in Chongling back then, Yi Xinhe had not been famous in the world of cultivators. She only appeared at the Deer Mountain Conference and killed many of the top cultivators in the world. But in these years of hiding, while Yi Xinhe's living needs were not extravagant, they were exquisite. If described in the words of the Guangzhou magnates, they were very stylish. The white peony, the ancient white tea produced by this tea plantation, was probably the best tea in the entire Qin dynasty. This tea garden was also Yi Xinhe's private property. Every year, only Yi Xinhe would be provided with tea. What Yi Xinhe drank was old tea that had been aged for more than 5 years and tasted great. Yi Xinhe was already dead, but some of the tea farmers in this tea garden still didn't know the news. The tea that was stored for him was still neatly stored in the warehouse. When the Yuanwu Emperor arrived at the tea plantation, he could still smell the fragrance of many new teas and old teas. But the clearest thing was the strong aura of ghosts and spirits emanating from the pavilion in the tea garden. The person waiting for him in the pavilion was a cultivator of great status. He was the publicly recognized alliance leader of the Qi dynasty. But in the eyes of the Yuanwu Emperor, this cultivator was nothing, because he was just a puppet that Su Qin had pushed out. This lonely one wants to see Su Qin, not you. The Yuanwu Emperor did not waste time. He stopped at the entrance to the tea garden and said coldly to the cultivator in the pavilion, "Supreme One has matters to attend to and cannot leave, so he had me come to pay my respects." The cultivator in the pavilion bowed to the Yuanwu Emperor from a distance. "I will pass on your intentions to him without a single mistake. There is no need." The Yuanwu Emperor shook his head and said, "This lonely one had arranged to meet him here to kill him. Pity he did not even have the guts to see this lonely one. Compared to Jing Liuli, he is far too lacking. He is not a threat." There was a hint of fear in the gloomy air. The cultivator in the pavilion said in a trembling voice, "As the Emperor, I said that I would discuss important matters with the Supreme One for mutual benefit. How can I go back on my words and set up a killing trap? I'm just wiping out something that cannot see the light. Wiping it out, it will be clean. There is no going back on my words. Do you think this lonely one is pedantic?" The Yuanwu Emperor did not want to waste time. So when he spoke, the clouds above opened and a holy pillar of light came down. The cultivator in the pavilion was a powerful grandmaster to begin with. When Yuanwu's voice sounded, he screamed, and dozens of black clouds shot out of his body and fled in all directions. But this holy pillar of light only landed on one of the black clouds. There was a muffled boom. The black clouds scattered, and Cultivator Chi's figure appeared in the pillar of light. The figure shrouded in black energy twisted violently, but even his scream could not escape from the pillar of light. The flesh and blood of this Qi cultivator peeled off layer by layer and turned into ashes. Then the bones inside were exposed. The remaining black clouds that had been used to obstruct and confuse perception immediately dissipated with the death of Grandmaster Qi. A Realm 7 Grandmaster like this did not even have the slightest ability to resist in front of him. The Yuanwu Emperor did not even bother to look at this puppet. In his view, Jing Liuli was a pawn that could be used, and Su Qin was an obstacle that could be eliminated first. Especially for the current Mie Qi, Su Qin was the kind of thorn that was not fatal but very annoying. But Su Qin did not think so. Ever since he had cultivated in White Goat Cave, he thought that everyone's view of him was wrong, especially between himself and Zhang Yi. He did not see Yuanwu because of his own choice. He chose to go to another appointment. Between Yuanwu and Zheng Xiu, he chose Zheng Xiu. This choice was very simple in his view. Every step of his strength could not be separated from Zheng Xiu's shadow. Even more importantly, in his view, Zheng Xiu was at her weakest and hoped to have a strong ally like him. When Yuanwu killed his puppet, he had already walked into the small town that was slightly desolate due to the continuous war. Before this, he had confirmed that the news had come from Zheng Xiu. His subordinates had come to this small town and confirmed that Zheng Xiu was in this town. When he approached the courtyard of the wealthy family, he could not help but have a disdainful smile. He felt a sense of impatience. He wanted to see how this mistress of Chongling, who had been knocked down from the clouds by Ding Ning, looked at him now, and if she was still as cold as before. However, when he walked into the courtyard and saw the person waiting for him inside, the mocking smile on his face instantly froze, and the smug look in his eyes turned into shock. Zhang, he was waiting for his arrival. Just like in the past in White Goat Cave, Zhang Yi appeared cautious and uneasy. Chapter 857. A bitter taste spread from Su Qin's mouth. In the next moment, he took a deep breath and smiled with difficulty. His smile was full of disdain. There was disdain for Zhang Yi and disdain for himself. So this was a trap from beginning to end? He looked at Zhang Yi and asked slowly. Zhang Yi nodded and rubbed his hands together as if he was at a loss. It's also a coincidence. After Zheng Xiu sent the message here, she was captured. I didn't expect her to write a letter to you and ask you to come here. If you want to die, why didn't you die earlier? You dragged yourself here to harm others. If I had not seen her handwritten letter before and confirmed that it was her handwriting, how could I have come here? Su Qin looked indifferently at him and said. Zhang Yi did not know how to respond to his words, so he did not answer. Su Qin's voice suddenly turned cold. Why is Ding Ning not coming? Zhang Yi shook his head. He did not know why Ding Ning did not come in person. In his view, the most likely reason was that Su Qin was not worthy of Ding Ning coming in person, because there were enough grandmasters waiting here. But he was too gentle. He felt that such words were too hurtful, so he did not want to say what he thought was most likely. You don't know anything, Su Qin sneered. In that case, I will tell you the reason. Zhang Yi was shocked. Su Qin sneered and said, because he wants me to lose willingly. If he fights, I am not a match for him. But his true identity is Wang Jingming. For us, he is a cultivator of the previous generation. It is not strange for him to teach a junior a lesson. But you are different. You and I are the same generation. He naturally wants me to lose to you. I have nothing to say. Zhang Yi still did not respond. This was Su Qin's conjecture. In his view, there was no meaning in arguing. Even though Su Qin's tone was filled with true disdain, he was used to it and was not angry. After Ding Ning had crippled his sword hand, Su Qin's personality had become much colder and more solitary. Especially after he had moved to Celestial Seal Sect, his personality had become even stranger. Seeing Zhang Yi so calm, and coming here full of confidence, only to find it was a dead end, he could not control his anger. Starting from White Goat Cave, you were a good person to everyone. But I can tell you, starting from White Goat Cave, I never thought highly of you. I always thought that a person like you should be a teacher, teach people how to read and write, and talk about filial piety. How can you be a killing swordsman? Su Qin's eyes burned with fire. He said coldly, Ding Ning, I feel that he calculated well. If even you can defeat me, then I have nothing to say. I will be convinced. Zhang Yi was not a plant. Looking at Su Qin's ruthlessness and hearing such direct words, he slowly frowned. Thinking of Su Qin's attitude towards him all this time, he finally started to get a little angry. He looked at Su Qin and asked 2 questions in return. Does cultivation depend on who looks up to you? Is cultivation to be a killing swordsman? Su Qin said disdainfully, cultivation is not to rise above others, not to kill for fame. Is it to cultivate virtue? You are only speaking your own thoughts. Zhang Yi looked at this ruthless junior sect brother and slowly said, at least for me, when White Goat Cave took me in as a disciple and taught me cultivation, I only wanted to be filial to my teachers, protect my junior sect brothers, and win glory for the sect. Even if I want to kill, it is to protect White Goat Cave. Back in Chongling, I could have given up fame for Shui and fought with junior sect brother to the end in Min Mountain Sword Sect. Even if I had to give up my life, I was willing. But you, other than thinking about yourself, what have you done for White Goat Cave? In your eyes, at the beginning, you and your fellow apprentices were just opponents, just stepping stones for you to climb up the ladder? Su Qin stilled. He had been famed for his intelligence and eloquence in White Goat Cave, but at this time, he found it difficult to respond to Zhang Yi's words, especially when he had never seen Zhang Yi have such an attitude and such fierce words before. It seems you have grown up. Many breaths later, he sneered. Zhang Yi looked at him and felt even more displeased. But before he could speak, Su Qin continued. No matter what I did in the Qi dynasty, I did not openly kill the Qin people, and I did not become enemies with the Bazin Kendo ground. What right does Ding Ning have to control me? He had you come because you were once my senior sect brother. But I have left White Goat Cave long ago. What right do you have to discipline me? White Goat Cave taught you, and many teachers taught you with all their hearts. They had great expectations. I always thought of our friendship as fellow sect members. But you have no feelings for White Goat Cave? Zhang Yi felt pain. His expression froze as he closed his eyes and said. Su Qin did not respond and only sneered. Zhang Yi slowly looked up. He thought of Chongling's White Goat Cave and the old man who had died before the Min Mountain Sword trials. Right now, I want to discipline you. He slowly looked down and could not disguise his disgust. But not because I was your senior sect brother in White Goat Cave, but because I really hate you right now. I really want to beat you to vent my anger. Such a coincidence. Su Qin laughed. Starting from White Goat Cave, I've always hated you and wanted to beat you to vent my anger. Zhang Yi closed his mouth and did not speak. Actually, I am more concerned about something else. Is this a fair duel? Su Qin said coldly. I do not want to defeat you and then have someone from the Bazin Kendo ground or Min Mountain Sword sect come out and kill me with one blow. You are truly a lowly person. This is what you care about the most. Zhang Yi stopped himself from being angry and then agreed to his conditions. This is a fair duel. If I win, I will take back what White Goat Cave gave you and cripple your cultivation. Even if you betrayed White Goat Cave, you cannot deny that everything you have today was built on the foundation that White Goat Cave gave you a chance to interact with the outside world. I also agree, but I am very curious why you feel you can win against me. Su Qin laughed happily. In his view, he had achieved his goal. Zhang Yi did not speak, but he gave a response. A strong aura of life was born in his hand according to his will. A short sword appeared in his hand. It was a simple and unadorned short sword that looked as ordinary as a rock. This was Shui Wangshu's life bond sword. Chapter 858. From the start of the Deer Mountain Conference until now, this period of time was like the rise of the Bazin Kendo ground, the most turbulent era. In just a few years, the talented young cultivators of this generation had changed a lot. Zhang Yi had come to Celestial Seal Sect from White Goat Cave. In reality, he had become the sect master of Celestial Seal Sect. Yet no matter if it was when he served Shui Wangshu in the alleys of Chongling, or now, he was just as humble and simple as the sword in his hand. The simple and unadorned rock was the most determined. This life bond sword was very compatible with his presence. Just by holding it so simply, in Su Qin's perception, there seemed to be an immovable rock forming in the world. Just the presence of the sword was enough to show that Zhang Yi was not the same as before. Yet this could not change Su Qin's opinion. Trash is trash. Su Qin looked coldly at Zhang Yi. In this life, you will either hide behind Shui Wangshu or Ding Ning. Everything you have was given to you by others. People like you have never experienced true battle. Zhang Yi grew angrier. In his view, etiquette and shame were the most natural rules in the world. The goal of cultivation was to help others, punish the strong, and help the weak, and not to bully the weak. But now, he did not want to say a word to Su Qin. If he had to speak, he would speak after he won. So facing Su Qin's disdain, his expression darkened slightly. He raised his sword to his chest and nodded slightly. Su Qin responded with a cold smile. A wisp of black qi seeped out from his sea of qi. Like a black belt, it circled around his waist and gradually expanded. The flow of this black energy seemed very calm, but in the air around him, a cold wind started to howl. A cold light flashed through Su Qin's eyes. There was a muffled boom. A wave of energy suddenly appeared in the air between the two. The battle immediately started. A dangerous presence came. Zhang Yi unhesitatingly attacked. A seemingly clumsy sword light formed in front of him, but carried a strong seal essence. Wild energy was summoned from the world, but it suddenly calmed in front of him and then shrank rapidly. There seemed to be countless stone steps in front of him, overlapping and blocking in front of him. The black energy around Su Qin's waist had disappeared. What replaced it was terrifying black flames coming out of the ground. Red sparks danced in the black flames and attacked the invisible stone steps that had just formed. An enormous sound occurred in the courtyard. All the trees, flowers, and even the fake mountains were turned to powder. Zhang Yi let out a muffled groan and was pushed back several feet. Su Qin frowned slightly. What surprised him was that Zhang Yi had thought of this before he did. Zhang Yi clearly did not attack first, but he seemed to have predicted what kind of power his attack would generate. This sword appeared to be an attack, but was actually a defense and completely blocked his path. However, he still did not think highly of Zhang Yi. Even in this round of confrontation, he still had the absolute advantage in terms of strength. Also, this was just his most ordinary probing method. This move came from Qi Siren's inheritance. With Su Qin's cultivation, using such a move was far from Qi Siren's. Yet this kind of attack could push back Zhang Yi. For the present world of cultivators, the power Zhang Yi showed was not much. Su Qin did not retreat a step. His crippled hand moved slightly. Countless twisted airflows spiraled out from his fingers, bringing up countless scarlet talismans in his sleeves. Each of these talismans was made from a very thin bone, and the runes on them seemed to be drawn with several types of blood. At this moment, hundreds and thousands of these bone talismans floated in the air above the courtyard in a chaotic manner, as if they were falling leaves in a violent wind. The moment each seal landed, they started to burn fiercely. Dark and cold nether fire burned among the blood-red seal scripts, giving off a terrifying smell of decay. This was an instant explosion. The bone seals immediately disappeared, and the blood-red nether fire turned into the shape of moths. These netherworld fire moths seemed to have a life of their own. They flew in strange trajectories in the air and fell towards Zhang Yi. This was the unique seal path that Su Qin had comprehended in Celestial Seal Sect, and then combined with the method he had obtained from the Shaman God and Qi Siren's ghostly methods. So when these blood-red nether fire moths formed and danced in the air, Su Qin's brows relaxed, and his face was filled with pride. This was his pride. Zhang Yi had cultivated in Celestial Seal Sect for a long time, much longer than him. In everyone's view, Zhang Yi cultivated hard and never gave up. But he was the same. He knew that in this small town, outside this courtyard, there would be many cultivators watching this battle. He wanted to tell these spectators, even if it was not a special fortuitous encounter, he could do better than Zhang Yi. The moment the nether fire burned, he seemed to have countless energies ignited in his body. This feeling was very good, and also reminded him that he had been anticipating and yearning for a battle like this with Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi immediately found it difficult to breathe. These nether flames burned up all the air around him and exuded a highly toxic aura. This aura even had a strong corrosive effect on vital essence. It seemed that in addition to the vital essence of gods and ghosts, it also contained the vital essence of the stars that were not part of this world. His lungs started to swell with pain. In the next moment, because of the difference in air pressure inside and outside his body, his lungs seemed to be about to explode. Without any hesitation, he reached out with his left hand. This was just what Zhang Yi felt. In reality, in Su Qin's perception, his attack was still fast, almost as fast as Su Qin's bone seals. A purple light appeared in his left hand. The true essence in his sea of qi, which was already swelling outwards, was rapidly compressed into his palm. He only clenched his fist slightly, and the slight change in his palm caused the palm lines on his palm to naturally form a unique rune. There was a loud boom. A wave of power exploded in his left palm. This was also a seal essence. Countless bright purple rays of light emanated from his left palm. There was no impact. It just froze. All the blood-red nether fire moths flying towards him were frozen in the air. This was a sealing seal. This was the most important true seal of Celestial Seal Sect, and also a true seal passed down to the sect masters. Before he left the Zhongshu Marquisate establishment with Ding Ning, the master of Celestial Seal Sect had given this true seal to him. Su Qin's expression froze slightly, and he frowned deeply. All the blood-red nether fire moths were frozen in the air, burning where they were like strange floating candles. Chapter 859. The killing intent turned into floating candlelight. The seal essence had been defeated. Even if Su Qin was unwilling to believe that Zhang Yi's Tao of Talismans could accomplish this, all of this was a fact. You really surprised me. Su Qin did not immediately attack. He took a deep breath, looked at the serious but determined Zhang Yi, and slowly said, "But you can use seal essence like this to defeat my move, because you have cultivated in Celestial Seal Sect for a longer time than me." Then he looked at Zhang Yi and said, "Don't worry." He had to admit that Zhang Yi in front of him was more troublesome than most of the Realm 7 Grandmasters he had faced before. Zhang Yi's moves were varied, but each one was a top work of the cultivation world and was unusually powerful. In his view, trouble meant risk. He did not want to take the risk of being seriously injured to defeat Zhang Yi, so he wanted to break Zhang Yi's confidence first. Yet today, this eldest senior brother of White Goat Cave had shown a side he could not understand. Or rather, he had never truly understood this eldest sect brother of his. "No." Facing his words, Zhang Yi shook his head and said in a serious tone, "Even if you have cultivated in Celestial Seal Sect for as long as I have, or even longer than me, you cannot surpass me in the seal path. This has nothing to do with your talent and hard work, but you will not have true friends. The sect master and the other teachers will not truly like you. They will not pass on their secret seal essences to someone like you. That's how it is between people." Zhang Yi looked at Su Qin, whose expression changed slightly, and said slowly, "If you do not treat people sincerely, people will not treat you sincerely. You only want to use other people or the sect. Then in the eyes of other people and the sect, you are just a weapon to be used, a tool to kill. You are so smart. Do you not even understand this? Do you want to become a tool for others to use?" Su Qin was silent for a moment before he said, "Everything I've done is because I don't want to become someone else's tool." "Then you've gone astray," Zhang Yi said simply and affirmatively. "The winner is king, and the loser is a bandit. Even the laws of the world are set by the person who holds the greatest authority and power in the world." "What wrong path?" Su Qin sneered. "As for cultivation, you should have heard of what it means to break through the Tao by force." When he finished speaking, the two of them stopped talking and didn't want to say anything else. When drinking with a bosom friend, 1,000 cups of wine are not enough, but when you don't agree, half a sentence is too much. The two of them were fundamentally different people. Neither of them could convince the other. Similarly, no words could break the other's Tao heart. Two terrifying auras, or rather, auras that should not appear on cultivators at their level of cultivation, bloomed at the same time. With the two of them as the center, all the houses in the wealthy merchant's courtyard collapsed, turning into flying rubble. Even in the eyes of cultivators, this was a very shocking scene. Threads of black energy floated up from the rubble on the ground. The black energy on Su Qin's face grew thicker. The meridians in his flesh started to bulge outwards. His face seemed to be painted and twisted. Behind him, there was a red light brighter than the sun. The red light and black gas collided, forming clusters of yuan qi vortexes. It was as if countless red spider lilies were dancing in the air. Hundreds of bloody arms stretched out of his back. While they were made from vital energy and primal energies of the universe, they looked no different from a real person's arm without the skin. Compared to Su Qin, Zhang Yi, who held a small sword, did not seem to have changed. However, there was another terrifying aura that was attracted by him. Above the ruined courtyard, the sky seemed to have been pulled down a little, constantly pressing down on the ground. The sky started to be filled with thick yellow light, like the most ordinary seal paper of celestial seal sect was covering the sky. A ghost-like wail sounded in Su Qin's energy sea. As the sound rang out, the entire space trembled. The hundreds of arms behind him grew in size and extended, all of them slapping toward Zhang Yi. Every arm contained a terrifying power. And the most shocking thing was that the nature of the Yuan Qi was almost completely different. Some were pure and fierce. Some carried corrosive flames. Some gathered intense corpse poison. And some were simply icy cold. At this time, Su Qin was stronger than when he had killed Minister Yin in Chongling. There were not many Realm 7 grandmasters in the world who could withstand such a pure crushing of power. This was the path that Su Qin wanted to tell Zhang Yi. No matter what realm you were in, what sword skills you had, what seal path you had, use power to defeat them all. Great power. The moment these hundreds of arms slapped toward Zhang Yi, countless gusts of wind swept towards Zhang Yi's body. Zhang Yi's body gave off the sound of bones cracking. His body had already been knocked off the ground and flew backwards. His ribs and sternum felt great pain as though they were about to break. But Zhang Yi's expression was still determined. The small sword in his hand that looked like an ordinary stone began to become sparkling and translucent. Then, he gripped the sword tightly and poured the power in his body into it. He swung the sword at the overwhelming number of demonic arms coming at him. The path of the sword in his hand was extremely precise, and it was not messed up at all. Sword chi lit up in the air. At the same time, they formed runes. His sword also represented his intentions and principles. There was reason in everything in the world. This reason was not decided by whose fist was stronger, but what people thought was right and wrong, the choice between good and evil. The yellow sky trembled like cloth. As his sword moved, many glowing and holy threads of light fell down. These threads of light were like transparent zither strings that landed on those arms. Countless shockwaves produced flames that resembled thousands of flowers blooming in this space. Zhang Yi's body shook violently. A trickle of blood fell from the corner of his mouth. Su Qin gave a muffled grunt. He was also attacked by the energy and took several steps back. Yellow Heaven Taoist seal. I had not thought that even this seal would be passed to you. An uncontrollable shout came from his thin lips. Zhang Yi was still retreating. His slash just now had not just used the power of the Yellow Heaven Taoist seal. At the same time, the sword lights formed a seal. The hundreds of arms that were slapping forward were entwined with countless transparent rays of light, and the space was constantly suffused with a glaze like purple light. For a moment, these arms were actually unable to move forward, but the powerful energy fluctuations were constantly being pulled by the forces of both sides, constantly shaking outwards in this space. Outside this ruined courtyard, at the place closest to the two's battlefield, there were two young cultivators about the same age as them. They were Zhang Yi's good friends. The man was Li Yi, and the woman was Murong Xiaoyi. Can he win? Murong Xiaoyi's face was pale. Looking at the swaying space, she found it difficult to breathe in the expanding wild wind. Li Yi's expression was not much better than hers. Hearing Murong Xiaoyi's question, he gritted his teeth and stared at the yellow sky. He shook his head. At least with the Yellow Heaven Taoist seal I taught him and his present power, he should not be able to stop it. Chapter 860. He had given the Yellow Heaven Taoist seal to Zhang Yi. No one in the world knew the power of the Yellow Heaven Taoist seal better than him, so his perception and judgment were not wrong. Su Qin's vital energy vibrated again. The hundreds of arms exerted power again. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst the explosions, the transparent lines of light wrapped around the hundreds of arms collapsed. The glass-like purple light in the air could not restrain these hundreds of arms. The hundreds of arms advanced again. The vast power swept over, and Zhang Yi's body flew back again. Zhang, he coughed up blood. He knew that his internal organs had been injured, but he didn't even think about his injuries. Instead, he made the simplest movement. He only released the seals in his sleeve. The style of his robes was the same as the robes of Celestial Seal sect. The sleeves were unusually wide and almost reached the ground. This kind of robe looked elegant, and when people wanted to be irritable, they would be limited by the large sleeves. They would be slower, and it would be easier for them to calm down. It would be harder for them to get angry, and they would gradually become elegant and well-mannered. But compared to cultivating this kind of nature over a long period of time, the greatest meaning of Celestial Seal sect robes was that there were many pockets in the sleeves, and they could hold many seals. Su Qin always thought that he was as hard-working as Zhang Yi. However, this could only mean that even he subconsciously believed that Zhang Yi was indeed very focused and hard-working when he cultivated. He had no distractions in his heart. Countless crimson talismans shot out from Zhang Yi's sleeves. Before his true essence could completely activate these small red talismans, the thunder fire on these small talismans had already swept outwards, causing Zhang Yi's sleeves to burn. These red seals passed through the burning sleeves and immediately filled Yue, Murong Xiaoyi, and Su Qin's vision like countless firebirds flying out. This was the blood saltpeter thunderfire seal. In Celestial Seal sect, this was a seal that many cultivators knew how to make. The basic material was purple thunder saltpeter, and this kind of saltpeter happened to be produced in Zhongshu Commandery. The only restriction to making this kind of seal was that one's cultivation had to reach Realm 6. Only when one reached Realm 6 could they use their life bond energy and blood to make seals. In terms of power, while this kind of seal was powerful, it did not change much. So Celestial Seal sect rarely had people make large amounts of such seals. Repeatedly making the same kind of seal was an extremely dry and dull action. Also, to make this kind of seal would consume one's life bond energy and blood. Are you crazy? Therefore, when he saw countless such talismans appear, even Su Qin was stunned and could not help but cry out. Zhang, he didn't have time to answer him. Refining the same type of talisman was a way for him to hone his patience. Moreover, when he was refining these talismans, he felt that the more talismans there were, the more terrifying their power would be. Especially when combined with the yellow heaven Taoist talismans, the power of these talismans was completely unleashed. He had to make sure he would not die. He immortal seal talisman seal sect, so the moment Su Qin could not control his emotions and cried out, he ignored the injuries in his body and forced his Qi to squeeze out a large amount of vital essence. At this moment, his body was like a stone thrown by a catapult, flying backwards. The yellow heaven Taoist seal perfectly matched his attack. Large amounts of primal energies of the universe drawn in by the yellow heaven Taoist seal were evenly and quickly injected into the blood saltpeter thunder fire seals that had been ignited by his vital energy. Countless balls of purple-red lightning and fire exploded. Yue and Murong Xiaoyi felt like their chests were hammered by a giant rock. The two of them didn't hear anything because their ears were shaken to the point that they couldn't hear anything. The two of them were unable to breathe. Their eyes widened to the extreme, but their pupils were constantly shrinking. An unimaginable scene appeared in front of them. These purple-red lightning and fire pressed against each other to form a physical ball of purple-red light. The lightning in the ball of light jumped like snakes. In the next moment, these purple-red lightning and fire turned into roiling black smoke that shot outwards. A harsh and furious scream sounded in the lightning and fire. Su Qin's figure passed through the black smoke. His body was still unharmed, and even his clothes had not been torn. But more than half of the hundreds of arms that came out of his back had been destroyed, and very few of them were intact. Countless sizzling sounds came from these arms, as if many sheepskin valves were leaking air. Zhang Yi, you still have? Looking at Zhang Yi's figure that had just landed heavily hundreds of feet away, Su Qin's eyes were red as he shouted in fury. Many of the scattered Yin energies gathered behind him and turned into small black flags. The power of these small black flags was still very strong. Following his will, they flew toward Zhang Yi. At this time, he wanted to say to Zhang Yi, "What other moves do you have?" However, before he could finish his sentence, he felt a sharp pain in his left leg. A simple, unadorned, soundless, and extremely sinister flying sword had already cut through the inside of his left thigh in an instant, instantly severing several of his main meridians. This sword was the small sword that Zhang Yi had been holding all this time. When he had retreated, this small sword had silently stayed in the ground and turned into a flying sword like this. This was a small trick that many swordsmen in Chongling would use. But because this trick was so common, Su Qin had not expected Zhang Yi to use such a trick in a fight like this. Pew! Black energy surged out of the wound. The small black flags that had just formed behind Su Qin suddenly collapsed. Su Qin pressed his hand on the wound on his thigh. Even though he used Qi Siren's healing methods, the sword essence that invaded his flesh and blood caused his wound to heal and then collapse. Blood flowed through the gaps between his fingers. Zhang Yi stood up amidst the dust and rubble. His chest was covered in blood, and his back was full of stab wounds. There were even some sharp stones embedded in his back. He did not look much better than Su Qin. But looking at Su Qin, who was also seriously wounded and holding the small sword that had flown back, Zhang Yi was even more confident that he could win against this junior sect brother. Inexplicably, even though Yu Yi and Murong Xiaoi, who were not far from him, started to feel that he could win against Su Qin, even though they did not feel he had a great advantage. Zhang Yi moved again. He started to attack. He raised the sword in his hand, and a slightly curved sword light rose into the air in front of him, like a goat's horn. White Goat Cave's sword moves. You really want to use your status as a senior sect brother to teach me a lesson? Su Qin laughed crazily. Chapter 861. This was the White Goat Hanging Horn. The White Goat Hanging Horn was meant for a stalemate. Su Qin did not know why Zhang Yi was using such a sword move. He did not want to use the sword, so where was the stalemate? As he laughed maniacally, Su Qin retreated instead of advancing, retreating hundreds of feet. He had an overwhelming advantage in terms of pure power, and he believed that the vital energy in his body far surpassed Zhang Yi's. There was no time limit to this kind of duel. Also, among the many ghostly methods he had learned from Qi Siren, he had methods to suppress his injuries. As long as he did not fall for Zhang Yi's little tricks, even if he could not immediately kill Zhang Yi, as time passed, Zhang Yi's wounds would grow worse. But all of this was just his thoughts. Just as his body turned into a series of afterimages and retreated, there was an explosion in the sky. The sky brightened. Large amounts of primal energies of the universe moved through the sky like mountains. The surging primal energies of the universe became even more condensed under the guidance of the yellow heaven Taoist seal. The transparent rays of light that were originally falling to the ground formed white powder visible to the naked eye, as if it was snowing. Su Qin raised his head to look at this scene, his eyes filled with disbelief. He was not a true Realm 7, but due to the special methods of the 12 shamans, his power far surpassed ordinary Realm 7s. Yet, to his disbelief, the amount of primal energies that Zhang Yi could attract far surpassed ordinary Realm 7s. What he could not understand the most was that Zhang Yi could attract primal energies of the universe much faster than he could. These primal energies of the universe, so condensed they looked like white powder, quickly gathered on the path of light created by Zhang Yi's sword, and then disappeared. The sword light continued to rise. There was another muffled boom in the sky, followed by countless echoes. Lu Yi and Murong Xiaoi looked up at the sky. They saw clouds forming a huge ring in the sky and spreading outwards. At the center of the sword light, the sky was exceptionally blue, shining with a crystalline and deep luster that they had never seen before. At this moment, they all felt the same way. It seemed like Zhang Yi's sword had opened up a passage in the endless void. Su Qin's figure was still retreating. He was also looking up at this scene. At this moment, he finally realized what had happened. In Celestial Seal Sect, he had created a unique seal method with his crippled hand. But Zhang Yi had also created his own sword seal path in Celestial Seal Sect. At this moment, Zhang Yi was only using the white goat hanging horn to carve a talisman. However, he did not know what kind of power such a talisman would produce when it gathered such an astonishing amount of heaven and earth yuan qi. Even Zhang Yi himself did not know, because he had never used such a method before. His personality was usually very gentle. Even during the Min Mountain sword trials, many people thought that he did not know how to fight. Yet in today's battle with Su Qin, he showed another characteristic of his: the patience and stubbornness of an honest person. Facing the powerful Su Qin, he was not afraid, and his fighting spirit burned even fiercer. It was like an epiphany in battle. He wanted to use the sword seal method. In all he had learned, the yellow Heaven Daoist seal was the method that could help him attract astounding amounts of primal energies of the universe. And the white goat hanging horn was the most stable and lasting sword move of his sword light. The more stable and lasting the sword path, the better it could hold seal essence. So he naturally used such a sword move to carve the seal. At this time, his seal essence had been completed, and energy far beyond his perception was mobilized. Guided by his killing intent, it was heading towards Su Qin. But before the killing intent arrived, even he did not know what kind of power it would attract. Pew! Su Qin's feet landed on the ground. Two tornadoes of black smoke rose from under his feet. Countless crystal marks suddenly appeared on his pitch-black face, as if his entire face was about to split apart. A terrifying amount of vital energy surged out of his energy sea. Blinding red light once again appeared behind him, forming hundreds of arms. Time seemed to freeze. The exceptionally blue sky suddenly turned black. Many blurry silver rays of light suddenly appeared and converged into beams of light. These rays of light were like pure silver and exceptionally textured. Yet the air was filled with the scent of death. This was star energy. Zhang Yi looked in shock at this scene. His sword seal was just to draw more power toward Zheng Xiu, but he hadn't expected it to be able to draw in the star energy outside the world like Zheng Xiu. In the next moment, he finally started to understand. This came from the method of the 12 shamans. That method was what Zheng Xiu wanted from the start. Although in his previous understanding, this was only a cultivation technique that constantly honed and strengthened his perception. But now he began to understand that if Zheng Xiu had this cultivation technique, she would naturally be able to rely on her own methods to control and gather the astral yuan qi that she was originally unable to sense and use. Her Starfire sword would be even stronger. The pure silver rays of light strangely twisted in the air, forming a silver sword. If one had not seen the formation process, many would have thought that this was a flying sword falling from the sky. Yet at this time, Zhang Yi's palm started to heat up. Zhang Yi found to his shock that the life bond sword in his hand was burning. The sword essence on this life bond sword had dissipated. Yet the remaining sword energy had not dissipated. At this time, the moving sword energy seemed to have a unique connection to this silver sword. Many tiny flames formed in the sword qi. Boom! In the next moment, the air between him and Su Qin was completely ignited into a sea of fire. The hot flames headed towards the small silver sword and stabbed towards Su Qin. Su Qin let out a roar. The newly formed arms of the shaman god behind him slapped towards this sword. The vital energy he had squeezed out of his energy sea exploded. The silver sword gathered flames and collided with the hundreds of arms. There was an enormous sound. The hundreds of arms shattered. The blood-like fragments turned black and turned into waves of black energy that swept outwards. The black energy filled the sky as though it would drown the world. In the terrifying wave of energy, Su Qin's figure could not be seen, but there was a howl like that of a wounded beast. In this howl, Zhang Yi gripped the sword in his hand even harder. His eyes were filled with caution and emotion. This might be the will of the heavens. The key to his great increase in strength was the method of the shaman god. And that method was something that Su Qin had obtained from the 12 shaman god temple and given to him. Chapter 862. The black gas rushed towards Zhang Yi, but was split apart by the sword chi from the short sword in his hand. The black gas rushed past him like a tide. In this moment, Zhang Yi's eyebrows rose slightly. Many different presences appeared in his perception. He stilled slightly. I am still too stupid to not discover it until now. In the next moment, he felt slightly ashamed. At this time, he finally understood why Ding Ning was assured to let him fight Su Qin. In reality, it was not that he had learned more, was more varied, or had more moves, but in essence, he had a natural ability to counter Su Qin. Or rather, from the method he grasped, he was Su Qin's nemesis. Indeed, no one could compare to Wang Jingming of the past and Ding Ning of the present. Zhang Yi was certain that if Ding Ning had his moves, victory would be decided in one move, and there would be no need to fight so hard. In the center of the black chi, Su Qin's body was riddled with crisscrossing wounds. It was as though countless thorns were dragging him back and forth. And within these wounds, there was silver-colored astral yuan chi flashing. These energies that were harmful to the human body were like a plague, spreading deep into his body. He howled crazily because of the pain and because he could not believe that Zhang Yi was able to use such a sword move. At the same time, because of unwillingness, he did not believe he would lose. As he howled, the vital energy in his energy sea furiously surged towards every meridian. The energy stored in his flesh and blood was squeezed out. A strange scene occurred. The wounds on his body quickly closed and turned into hard black scabs. His flesh quickly shrank like he was turning into hard leather. An extremely dark and cold presence spread out of his body. His bones seemed to be wrapped in this layer of hard skin. He looked like a ghost of legend. This was clearly a secret art to forcefully squeeze vitality and control wounds. Even though it could only last for a short time, both Lu Yi and Murong Xiaoyi were certain that in this short time, the power Su Qin could release would surpass any attack in the past. But at this time, Zhang Yi, who had been cautious, shook his head. An enormous sound came from behind Su Qin. The scattered black energy suddenly froze in the air and quickly gathered towards his body like thousands of demon wings. I am too stupid. There was no need to go through so much trouble. But looking at this scene, Zhang Yi could only honestly express his feelings at this time. His life-bond sword disappeared from his hand. His fingers began to move, as if he was pulling on many invisible strings. The yellow heaven Taoist seal in the air gave off many threads of transparent light. These threads of light appeared weak compared to the energy vibrations behind Su Qin. But in the next moment, Su Qin's eyes were filled with disbelief. Many of the energies in his body immediately went out of control. The energies that had been following the rules he had drawn suddenly fell into chaos. At the start, it was just a small portion, but the chaos in this small portion was enough to ignite the entire oil basin like sparks falling into it. Muffled sounds sounded in his body. The sound hit his body, which had become abnormally hard after being changed by the secret technique. Like countless stones hitting metal, like many prisoners in a prison who were hammering the hard door with their hands, trying to break out. In the next instant, countless booms echoed from the world behind him, even higher up in the sky. Countless chaotic lights exploded in the sky from the black energy that had gathered behind him, like the wings of a demon. The ground under Su Qin's feet rippled like water. His body, under the enormous vibrations, was like a floating object in a storm. He was thrown into the air by the chaotic energy and shook continuously in the air. Why is it like this? Su Qin was not the only one who found it hard to understand. Even Yu Yi and Murong Xiaoyi were shocked and bewildered. Whoosh! Zhang Yi's figure broke through the wind. The small sword appeared in his hand again. The glowing sword light cut through the chaotic flows of energy and light. Before Su Qin landed on the ground, Zhang Yi's figure appeared in front of Su Qin. The small sword in his hand landed on Su Qin's forehead, but did not penetrate deeply. Like a teacher holding a pointer or ruler, it pressed down on Su Qin's forehead. Su Qin landed heavily on the ground, creating a wave of dust. In the dust, Zhang Yi held the sword and pointed at Su Qin on the ground. He said seriously, "Junior sect brother, you have lost." This blow to the forehead completely destroyed Su Qin's confidence and pride. His face was distorted as he looked at Zhang Yi, who was standing in front of him. He wanted to stand up, but he couldn't. He couldn't even sit up. His dim eyes were filled with countless emotions. Why? Mixed means and vital energy are not the same. Zhang Yi looked at Su Qin, who had lost his pride and was in great pain. He said softly, "You are very strong, but even your vital energy and the primal energies of the universe in your body were forcefully absorbed from others. These forces were forcefully mixed together by you, but it's just like many people in your body. It's impossible for them to fuse together perfectly. As long as you provoke them, they will fight among themselves." How can it be like this? Su Qin laughed. His laughter was incomparably mournful. How could the cultivation method created by the invincible sorcerer of the past have such a flaw? How could it be broken like this? Zhang Yi looked at his desperate state and could not bear it. "I think that if the 12 methods were complete, there would not be such a flaw. But you only received one of his methods, and I also cultivated one of his methods. Perhaps this Grandmaster did it on purpose." The 12 techniques he left behind might have restrained each other in the first place. He divided his disciples and kept each other in check. This was to prevent his disciples from becoming arrogant and losing respect for the rest of the world. Zhang Yi hesitated for a moment before adding, "Only with reverence in your heart can you act according to the rules. Only then will you not act recklessly. It is because of the method I passed down." Su Qin was stunned, and then he shouted with all his strength, "Impossible! I've comprehended those talisman insights as well, and I couldn't comprehend anything at all. How could you? Do not think about this." Zhang Yi originally could not bear it, but when he thought of how Ding Ning had always called him wishy-washy, he could not help but shake his head and interrupt Su Qin's shouting. "Do not think about these cultivation problems. You are crippled." Su Qin's voice suddenly stopped. Chapter 863. Crippled? Su Qin felt that Zhang Yi's voice was very far away. However, even after Zhang Yi had finished speaking for a long time, the sound was still ringing in his ears, causing him to be in a trance. Was this something that had really happened? Was this the real world? He felt his body was very light, like he was floating in the clouds. It did not seem real. But if it was not real, why did his heart hurt so much? Was it more painful than when his hand had been crippled? He raised both of his hands in realization. More than half of the energy in his hands had been burned and was extremely dry. Even his good hand was like the hand of an old man. He laughed like an idiot. Most of the time, Zhang Yi, his senior sect brother, was no different from an idiot in his eyes. Yet today, when he was at his proudest, he lost to such an idiot? Also, this battle had been a fair one. No one had interfered. Looking at Su Qin, who was laughing like an idiot, Zhang Yi could not bear to see him and said softly, "Your wounds are serious, but you have left these conflicts. You only need to rest, and you can live well." "Live well?" Su Qin laughed bitterly. "I was the master of the Qi cultivation world. I was about to take charge of the Qi dynasty. I studied the 12 shamans, Qi Siren, and the director of Celestial Seal sect, unparalleled, but I am crippled like this. You say I can live well? Do not care about him." Murong Xiaoyi walked next to Zhang Yi and gave Zhang Yi a healing pill. She looked with disgust at the crazy Su Qin. In his eyes, there is no sect. You and Ding Ning are no different. For people like him who see everyone as enemies and step on people to climb up, he has no friends or sect to speak of. Since he has never respected you and never thought of you as a senior sect brother, why do you care about him? Zhang Yi calmed down and thought for a while before replying seriously. Even if it's an unrelated passerby, I can't bear to see him die. I always want him to live well. Pity? Like pity for a passerby? Su Qin raised his head with pain and difficulty. He slowly stood up. His body swayed, and he fell heavily to the ground again. But in the next moment, he gave a bestial howl and stood up again. You'll never understand what truly defeated me. It is people like you who can defeat me, sympathize with me, and make me despair. People like me will never live as mediocre as you. Either stand at the top and look at the scenery, or die with a bang and jump off the cliff. Under Zhang Yi's shocked gaze, Su Qin walked towards the ruined courtyard. There was a hole. There had once been a well there that Zheng Xiu had used to throw away corpses. In his battle with Zhang Yi, the well's railings had been turned to rubble. Even the well water had been swept away by the wild energy. Su Qin walked in front of the hole. The moment Zhang Yi's mind blanked, he jumped in. A muffled sound came from the bottom of the well. There seemed to be an unwilling howl, but then there was no more sound. Zhang Yi looked at the well where his figure had disappeared. His lips trembled, but he could not speak. He still did not understand. In this world, shouldn't everyone be living well? Could it be that only by living a relaxed and happy life would one be able to see the beautiful scenery in front of their eyes? So straightforward. Murong Xiaoyi walked to the well to take a look. She nodded at Lu Yi and concluded, "He's quite a formidable person." Louis did not know what he was feeling right now. Especially when he looked at Zhang Yi's trembling profile, his emotions were slightly affected. Murong Xiaoyi's words caused him to shake his head. He thought Su Qin had tried to reach the peak of the world, but in the end, he only received such a sentence. What was the meaning? In a corner of this small town, in a wine shop, a man and woman sat across from each other. Before the battle began, all the unrelated citizens of this small town had already left, and the entire street became incomparably empty. When the wild energy rampaged through the small town, half of the buildings were destroyed. The debris was blown everywhere, and it was a mess. Yet this man and woman were still slowly drinking. There was a plate of beef and a plate of pickled vegetables to go with the wine. The surroundings of the wine shop were undamaged. The woman was by Shan Shui, and the man was Li Yunrui. A good show. It wasn't until the end of the battle, when Su Qin jumped into the well to commit suicide, that she turned around and said these words. Her expression was cold. She had seen many deaths, even though she had seen Su Qin's ambition long ago. And this ambition was so great that he even had animalistic intentions towards her. But that was it. She was too young and took things for granted. She had too little experience and thought of everything too simply. She saw things too simply, and even her actions were too simple. In her view, even compared to Yi Xiao, who had endured for many years and almost killed Ding Ning with a formation, Su Qin was far inferior. Yi Xiao could be considered a formidable person. What was Su Qin? Even though she was famed in the world back then, she still trembled in fear and only dared to risk entering Chongling for the lonely mountain sword horde. Thinking back to when the Bazankendo ground rose, the sects and old families in the world had many powerful people who had appeared and died. There were too many people like him. Even a great dynasty would rise and fall in the blink of an eye. It was just a passing cloud. Do you feel unreconciled? Li Yunrui had been sitting facing the courtyard where Zhang Yi and Su Qin were. Seeing the play end, he raised his wine cup, smiled slightly at Bai Shan Shui, and asked softly. Bai Shan Shui smiled sarcastically and asked in response, "What unreconciled?" As the great rebel of Cloud Water Palace of the Wei dynasty, and having fought with the Qin dynasty for many years, in the end, you found that it became a matter of the Qin dynasty. The grudge between the Bazankendo ground and Yuanwu was resolved. You sat and drank, Li Yunrui said with a smile. Would you feel unreconciled? This vigor is like firewood. At the start, the vigor is like fire, but as time passes, the vigor will fade, and in the end, everything will fade. In the end, it is best to find nothing. The ambition of a king is not as good as this cup of wine. Bai Shan Shui turned around and looked at Zhang Yi. Ding Ning, this senior sect brother of White Goat Cave, saw through everything from the start. What is the meaning? Peace of mind is best. Regardless of the goal, regardless of whether it is completed in the end, peace of mind is best. Otherwise, everything will become an obsession, and you will not be at peace for the rest of your life. Li Yunrui drank all the wine in his cup. When the mood is good, there will be good wine everywhere. Chapter 864. Bai Shanshui smiled faintly. She was at ease and content. She did not think about Su Qin's end. She was just curious. The senior sect brothers of White Goat Cave held great importance in Ding Ning's heart. But other than Zhang Yi, White Goat Cave also had a junior sect brother, Shen Yi. Based on what she knew, Shen Yi was a member of a prestigious family in Guangzhou. Theoretically, he should be able to help Shen Yi do many things. But Shen Yi did not seem to be by Xie Changxing's side. Then where did this junior sect brother of White Goat Cave go? She knew that Ding Ning had his own plans. When she left the matter and came to watch the battle between the Bazinkendo ground and Yuan Wu as a spectator, she found it very interesting. She looked up at Chongling. As far as she could see, Chongling's sky was clear without wind or rain. But she knew that there was a storm in the Yuan Wu Emperor's mind right now, because a letter with Ding Ning's request should have been delivered to Yuan Wu's hands. Yuan Wu was in the palace. He was dressed casually and was still in the seclusion room where he usually cultivated. There were 2 letters on the table in front of him. He rarely dealt with political matters. Even after the 2 prime ministers had died, most political matters were still handled by the ministers of the ministries. Only some important matters would be delivered to him. One of the 2 letters was from Ding Ning, and the other was from Emperor Yin of the Yin dynasty. The contents of the 2 letters were very simple. Ding Ning only mentioned a condition. If Su Fu's sword formation of boys and girls was given to Ding Ning, he could return Zheng Xiu to Yuan Wu's hands. The letter from the Yin Emperor was a request for peace. If the Qin army did not continue to attack the Yin Emperor would cede land for peace. Looking at these 2 different letters, Yuan Wu's expression was calm. First, he slowly threw the letter from Ding Ning into the brazier beside him. Then he simply said to an official who was waiting for his reply at the door, "I refuse." Then he threw the letter from the Yin Emperor into the brazier and said, "If you want peace, first kill the Yin Crown Prince and the general to show your sincerity. If you kill the Crown Prince of Yin, the Qin army will retreat 100 miles. If you kill the commander-in-chief, the Qin army will leave the Yin territory." The official standing quietly at the door accepted the order and left. When this official was several dozen zhang away from this quiet room, his body began to tremble slightly, sweat continuously pouring out from his back. Before this, he felt that the palace was very cold. He felt that this coldness came from the omnipresent gaze of the mistress of the palace. But now, the mistress of the palace would never return. However, the palace that had lost its mistress seemed to have become even colder. He refused. Shen Xian looked at the reply from the Chongling Imperial Palace and said to Zheng Xiu. He and Zheng Xiu were on a boat on the Wei River outside Chongling. At this time, there was a man dressed in ordinary coarse clothing standing silently at the bow of the boat. He was Chief Inspector Chen. Hearing Shen Xian's voice, he sighed softly. Zheng Xiu's eyes were dim. But when she heard Shen Xian's words, a flame burned in her eyes. She asked serenely, "What conditions did Ding Ning give?" Su Fu's sword formation. Shen Xian's answer was simple. Zheng Xiu said, "The sword formation of virgin boys and girls?" Shen Xian nodded. "He only asked for such a condition?" Zheng Xiu smiled. Her smile was strange and indescribable. But Shen Xian had seen this kind of smile on the faces of many prisoners. He raised an eyebrow slightly and said rudely, "If you ask for too much, Yuan Wu will not agree. I want to see Ding Ning." Zheng Xiu did not look at his expression. Her eyes were empty, as though she could not even see the sky in front of her. But her tone was unquestionable. "Tell Ding Ning that I want to see him. You feel that Yuan Wu will agree to your conditions." In Jiaodong Commandery, Zhang Sun Qinshua looked at Ding Ning and asked, "I hope that he will." Ding Ning looked at her and said, "This condition is not harsh, but I feel that he will not." Zhang Sun Qinxue shook her head. "In essence, Yuan Wu and Su Qin are not much different. If he can achieve his goal, anyone can be sacrificed, and I hope that he will refuse." Zhang Sun Qinxue said her true feelings. This way, the entire world will know that he does not care about Zheng Xiu. As a woman, Zheng Xiu will not even have any face left. They are such an adulterous couple. I hope that she will suffer more. The sword formation with children and girls will be troublesome. The power is secondary. More importantly, these are true children, Ding Ning said slowly. Even on the battlefield, killing these people will attract criticism. I am not afraid of criticism, but in the end, it will slow down the progress of the war, and more people will die because of this. Yuan Wu will not think of this, so he will not agree to your conditions. Zhang Sun Qinxue smiled, and then became serious. But I do not understand. Why does he still have confidence even now? He does not have confidence. He just has one last move. In his view, even if all his plans fail, if he throws out that move, I will receive it. Ding Ning looked calmly at her and said. Zhang Sun Qinxue stilled slightly. What? When he feels that everything cannot be reversed, he will publicly challenge me. After all, a fair duel is the spirit of the Bazin Kendo ground. I started it in the Qin dynasty. He knows that if it comes to that step, I will not refuse to have a fair duel with him. Ding Ning smiled disdainfully. But before that, he will do his best to complete what he wants to do. He will do his best to destroy Yin Qi. At that time, in his view, if he can kill me in a fair duel, then everything will be done as he wants. Zhang Sun Qinxue was not stupid, but in Chongling, she felt that nothing was more important than cultivation. But at the end of this conflict, she understood that she, like Bai Shanshui and the others, was gradually becoming a spectator, especially now, when she heard Ding Ning's words. Then why does he not use this time to challenge you? Zhang Sun Qinxue frowned. He has an advantage in vital energy cultivation. Even so, he does not have absolute confidence, so he will try to make himself stronger. Ding Ning looked at her and said seriously, "He has always been afraid of me. In the past, many of my friends, including many people from the Bazin Kendo ground, competed with me in the sword. Usually, we sparred many times, but he did not even once." Chapter 865. Fear was actually a very special emotion. They told themselves they did not need to be afraid, but they could not stop themselves from being afraid. Just like how some people were afraid of the dark. They knew there was nothing in the darkness, but they were afraid. Zhang Sun Qinxue slowly realized a fact. Yuan Wu had always lived in Wang Jingming's shadow. Before he ascended the throne, he had always feared Wang Jingming's cultivation and feared that the Bazin Kendo ground would take the throne. After he started the coup, he was still afraid of Wang Jingming's rebirth. Most likely, this thought lingered in his mind, so he was more certain than anyone else that Ding Ning was Wang Jingming's nine-death silkworm reborn. In reality, after taking over the true Jiaodong commandery and reaching Realm 7, I have never feared a fair fight with him. Ding Ning smiled faintly. It is very simple to force him to the last step, as long as the Donghu monk's cultivation recovers, or I reach Realm 8. Zhang Sun Qinxue nodded. She understood the meaning of Ding Ning's words. Regardless of whether the Donghu monk's cultivation recovered or Ding Ning reached Realm 8, Yuan Wu would not have the power to stop Ding Ning from openly returning to Chongling. If Ding Ning and the Donghu monk worked together, even if they entered Chongling directly, they could kill Yuan Wu. Each day, Zhang Sun Qinxue and Ding Ning would have one or two such conversations. But other than these conversations, more and more of their lives were peaceful and comfortable. It seemed that on the Qin, Yin, and Qi battlefields far away from Jiaodong Commandery, the more intense the battle between the three dynasties was, the more irrelevant the final outcome was to them. They were becoming more and more spectators. I know the whereabouts of Shun Yi, Yi Jingnan, and Wang Taishu. In the morning of the next day, when Zhang Sun Qinxue and Ding Ning were walking slowly on the shore of Jiaodong Commandery after eating breakfast, Zhang Sun Qinxue looked at the red sun in the distance and smiled proudly. Ding Ning was surprised. You heard it from Bailey Sushue. I heard some of Lin Zhuzhou's arrangements for going out to sea. The rest was guessed. Zhang Sun Qinxue said cunningly. You think they can find some spirit medicines to help the Donghu monk recover? Not only him, but also Bailey Sushue and Fang Xiaomu. However, Bailey Sushue and Fang Xiaomu's injuries were more difficult to treat. Even in the records, there were no records of them recovering from their injuries. However, it was not difficult to find medicines that could prolong life. While Jiaodong Commandery has more sea maps than our Bazinkindo ground, they do not have some of the sea maps that our Bazinkindo ground has. Ding Ning smiled and said, Shun Yi and Yi Sealing went out to sea a long time ago. The one leading them was the old official next to Yi Sealing. As to Wang Taishu and the others, they went out later, but with the help of many Chu people and Xie Changsheng, their progress was smooth. Zhang Sun Qinxue said, Did you find anything? Ding Ning shook his head. We brought back many spirit medicines, but we have not found any that can help them recover their cultivation. Zhang Sun Qinxue was silent for a moment. What is it? Ding Ning was puzzled. Previously in Chongling, I wanted to kill Yuan Wu, but I never thought of fighting him fairly. First, my cultivation is not as good as his, and I am not a match for him in a fair fight. Second, I feel that with someone like him, why should I fight him fairly? Zhang Sun Qinxue looked up at Ding Ning and did not disguise his disgust towards Yuan Wu. People like him will not cooperate with you in a fair fight. I do not want to give him a chance to fight you fairly. Especially now. I feel that for someone like him, the best way to die is for you to casually beat him to death like a dog that has fallen into the water. Let him be beaten to death in an incomparably miserable manner, and not give him a glorious battle that is worthy of being recorded in the annals of history. Ding Ning's expression did not change much. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he did not speak. He understood Zhang Sun Qinxue too well. He knew that since Zhang Sun Qinxue said this, she had thought of many things and would continue to speak. Zhang Sun Qinxue's expression was very calm. She and Ding Ning were used to such calm conversations. Compared to the time in the Falling Parasol wine shop in Chongling, it was just less cold. You have not found a spirit medicine that can help the Donghu monk recover his cultivation, but there may soon be a turn for the better. Zhang Sun Qinxue turned to look at Ding Ning and said softly, News from Chongling has come today. As expected, Yuan Wu did not agree to your conditions, and then Zheng Xiu proposed to meet you. You will be displeased if you meet, so it is better not to meet. Ding Ning could not help but shake his head and ask, I heard you say that there may soon be a turn for the better. Does she want to meet me to make a deal with me? Zhang Sun Qinxue frowned slightly and said, Xin Xian asked her. She wants to see you to ask you a few things, and she hopes that you can give her a chance to fight Yuan Wu. Ding Ning frowned deeply and said disdainfully, I will give her a chance to fight Yuan Wu. She is more seriously wounded than Su Xiaomu and Bailey Sushue. How can I give her a chance like this? Your mind is still in chaos. Zhang Sun Qinxue looked at Ding Ning, but was not angry. She gave a rare smile. Since she says so, she naturally has a way for her to fight Yuan Wu. The key is whether you want to or not. Ding Ning stilled slightly. He found that Zhang Sun Qinxue was right. His mind was in chaos. Regardless of whether you want to or not, Zhang Sun Qinxue did not give him any more pressure. She turned her head and looked at the seabirds flying over the vast sea. Her voice passed through the wind. I really want to see Yuan Wu and her fight. In my view, it is best if she and Yuan Wu fight to the death. Both of them are wounded. Yuan Wu has become a drowning dog, and then you go to Chongling to fight this drowning dog. That is fair. Ding Ning thought seriously. Then he laughed. What you think is what I think. If it can be like this, then it is best. Zhang Sun Qinxue laughed. Her smile was not as beautiful as the blooming flowers. I am just afraid you are stubborn. Ding Ning deliberately sighed softly and said with a smile, You are not worried that I am stubborn. You are worried that if I am not a match, or even if I can win against Yuan Wu, I will be seriously wounded. You are worried. Zhang Sun Qianqua's face flushed red. Ding Ning became serious. If that is the case, I will have to trouble them to find fourth Mr. Zhao. Zheng Xiao wanted to borrow fourth Mr. Zhao's sword before, but without fourth Mr. Zhao's permission, he took it back. Now, if she wants to fight Yuan Wu, fourth Mr. Zhao should be happy to lend it to her. Chapter 866. When Jiaodong Commandery was peaceful, and even some of the small families that belonged to the Zheng family started to get used to the rule of the Bazinkindo ground and the Chu army. Within the Yin territories, the Yin army and people were facing the darkest time of the dynasty. Within 100 miles of the Qin and Yin border, the Yin army had left behind more than 300,000 corpses. Compared to the total number of Yin and Qi armies, the loss of 300,000 Yin soldiers was not astounding. Yet from the defeat in Guangzhou until now, after the Yin army had left behind the 300,000 corpses of their comrades, there were less than 400,000 left. Most importantly, a troop of Qin army had quietly separated the Qi army from the Yin army. What the Yin people wanted to cry was, from start to finish, the Qin army had used their main force to chase after the Yin army. The Qi army did not encounter a strong Qin attack as they retreated. At this time, the goal of the Qi army was clear. The reinforcements of the Qi army were gathered at the border cities of the Qi army. They were waiting, but did not have any desire to attack. In reality, the Yin people knew that if the roles were reversed, the Yin people would think the same as the Qi, to lose as few cities as possible and preserve their armies. The power of the Qin army was not unlimited. When the Qin army used up all their power in the Yin territories, they could not attack the Qi territories. Thus, the Qi dynasty had a chance to breathe. Baishu City was one of the border cities of the Yin territories. In the past, there had been 50,000 Yin soldiers stationed here, and tens of thousands of prisoners and laborers sent here. Yet at this time, Baishu City was silent, and there were no dogs barking. Occasionally, there would be the cawing of some crows that made people uneasy. There was a thin layer of dust covering Baishu City. Many courtyards only had half-closed doors, and some did not even have time to put away the clothes. All the soldiers of Baishu City, including the prisoners and laborers, had left more than 10 days ago to help the defeated Yin army. But none of them had returned. The reinforcements that had left all died at the Bitterwater crossing. It was that battle that had completely separated the Yin and Qi armies. The general that had led the Qin army was the commander of the present Qin army, Bai Qi. The figure of Crown Prince Ji Dan appeared in front of a courtyard. He looked at the courtyard where the master seemed to have only left for a short while, but in reality, the master would never return. His eyes were filled with sorrow. This was the home of one of the generals in Cup Earth City. And this general, when he was in the capital of Yin, was once his classmate and had once studied under the same teacher as him. More hurried footsteps and horse hooves could be heard in the dead, silent streets. The sound of horse hooves finally stopped around the courtyard. Several generals whose armor was covered in dust dismounted from their horses, silently walking into this courtyard. Your Highness, a general whose face was covered by an armor and mask bowed deeply and coldly. His voice was slightly cold as he said, "You shouldn't have left the army and come here alone." Ji Dan smiled bleakly and said, "Are you worried about my safety or that I will escape?" The general stiffened and didn't respond for a while. "I'm just here to pay my respects to an old friend." Ji Dan took a deep breath and slowly exhaled. He shook his head and said with complicated emotions, "Father asked Yun Wu for peace in the end?" The general was silent for a moment and then nodded. He said yes. "And the price?" Ji Dan calmed down and looked at this general who he was familiar with, but was not even willing to take off his mask in front of him. The general controlled his emotions and said slowly, "It's you, Your Highness. I was the person closest to Zhang Yi in the past. Before this war started, I was the one who opposed attacking the Qin without regard for the intentions of the Bazinkindo ground. In Yuan Wu's view, if something happens in the Yin, if I replace father, then the power of the Yin will go to the Bazinkindo ground." Ji Dan looked at the general with a grimace and said, "So he will want me to die. But as a general of my dynasty, looking back, Do you feel that my opposition is reasonable? After a pause, Jidan took a deep breath and looked pleadingly at the general. Think again. With the situation of the Yin dynasty right now, is it more useful to kill me and ask Yuan Wu for peace, or is it more useful to ask the Bazin Kindo ground for help? Keep me alive. Let me go see Zhang, Ding Ning. No matter how many of the Yin dynasty will die in the end, the outcome will not be as bleak as the Han, Zhao, and Wei. The general was silent for a long time. Then he shook his head and said, "But according to the emperor's orders, this is not something I should consider." Ji Dan laughed. Not only was his smile filled with bitterness, there was also an indescribable bitterness. That is why General Fan is already dead. Otherwise, with him around, he would not have sent you to kill me. Father is truly an incapable ruler. Shut up, the general said harshly. There is a difference between ruler and subject. Your thoughts are just your own wishful thinking. In the view of other people, what the Yin dynasty needs the most right now is time to breathe. You think that after this breath, the Qin dynasty will be exhausted, and then Yuan Wu and Bazin Kindo ground will fight. Maybe you could just sit and watch. Jidan also laughed harshly. You stupid idiots, if you do this, you will only make Ding Ning and Zhang more disappointed in you. They will not interfere in the Yan's matters. They will let nature take its course and watch as Yuan Wu destroys the Yin. Also, the most important thing is not this. Before the general could speak, Ji Dan said harshly, a dynasty does not depend on how much wealth they have, how many cultivators they have, or how many armies they have, but whether they have their own backbone. If they kill me for peace, then this dynasty will lose everything. If they lose their own spirit, they will not even be able to turn around. The general's chest started to rise and fall violently. The chests of the generals around him were the same. Even under the thick armor, it was so obvious. Stupid. But looking at their gazes, Ji Dan knew that their intentions would not change. Stupid. So sad. A good emperor for half a lifetime, but his reputation is ruined. Look at how scared you are. I will kill myself and hang my head on the city gate tower. Let me see how the Yin dynasty is destroyed. Amidst the sorrowful cries, a sword light flew out of Ji Dan's hand. His head left his body and leapt up with the blood. While he died, his eyes were wide and angry. The generals bowed their heads, not daring to look at his eyes. They used cloth to wrap around his head. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.